Story 1. The town of Blackwater, Oregon, had one rule everyone followed without ever saying it aloud. You don't go near the old radio tower after dark. It stood on a ridge above town, skeletal and rusted, its red aircraft light long dead. Officially, it had been decommissioned in 1987 after a lightning strike fried the transmission equipment. Unofficially, people claimed it had never really stopped broadcasting. On October 12, 2019, a package arrived at the Blackwater Sheriff's Office. No return address. Inside, a digital recorder. And a note. Play track 17. Deputy Mara Ellison had worked missing persons long enough to recognize dread when she felt it. It wasn't fear. It was something colder, heavier. She closed her office door before pressing play. Static filled the room at first, soft, low, almost like breathing. Then a voice. Male. Whispering. If anyone finds this, don't come up here. It's not empty, it's listening. Mara froze. The voice belonged to Daniel Harlow. He'd vanished 3 weeks earlier. Last seen hiking near the Blackwater Ridge. The recording continued. Footsteps on gravel. Wind. The distant hum of something mechanical. Then Daniel again, clearer now. I thought it was abandoned. But the equipment, it's warm. There's power. There shouldn't be power. A metallic creak echoed through the speaker. I can hear it through the headphones. It's broadcasting something under the static. Not music. Not speech. It's... The sound cut abruptly. Silence. Then a new voice. Not Daniel. Not human. Layered. Distorted. As if multiple tones were speaking at once. Stay. The file ended. Mara sat back slowly. There were 16 tracks before track 17. She didn't press them. Not yet. Instead, she pulled Daniel's case file from her drawer. Age 27. Amateur radio hobbyist. Recently moved to Blackwater after inheriting his grandfather's cabin. In his last email to a friend, he'd written, "There's something weird about the old tower. I pick up a signal at exactly 2:13 a.m. every night. Same pattern. Like it's waiting." 2:13 a.m. Mara glanced at the clock on her desk. 2:11 a.m. The power flickered. Her office radio crackled. Static. Then, a faint hum. The dispatcher's voice burst through suddenly. "Deputy Ellison? You're still there?" "Yes." A pause. "You're not going to like this." Mara stood. "What?" "We're getting 911 calls." "How many?" 23 so far." Her stomach tightened. "Reporting what?" Another pause. "They're all saying the same thing." The line hissed. Then the dispatcher whispered. "They are hearing a voice through their radios." Mara's computer screen flickered. The speakers beside her desk emitted a low tone. She hadn't touched the recorder. But it had turned back on. Track 18. There was no track 18. The display glitched. Audio began playing. Wind. Metal. Heavy breathing. Daniel again. "I climbed the tower. I shouldn't have. I thought if I could shut off the transmitter, it would stop." A long pause. "It's not transmitting outward." Metal groaned in the background. "It's transmitting down." The office lights went out. Total darkness. Only the recorder's screen glowed faint blue. Mara's police radio activated on its own. Static flooded the room. And beneath it, a pattern. Rhythmic. Pulsing. Almost like a heartbeat. Her phone vibrated in her hand. A new text message. Unknown number. It contained only coordinates. They pointed directly to the base of the Blackwater radio tower. The lights snapped back on. The recorder stopped. Dead silence. Mara stared at the coordinates. Then at Daniel's file. Then at the clock. 2:13 a.m. The radio in her office whispered one word. So faint she almost imagined it. "Come." By 3:02 a.m., she was driving up the winding gravel road toward the tower. Fog rolled thick over the ridge. Her headlights cut through it in thin, useless beams. As she neared the clearing, she saw something that made her slow to a crawl. The tower light was on. It hadn't worked in 32 years. But now it blinked red. Steady. Alive. A dashboard radio turned itself on. Static. Then Daniel's voice again. But this wasn't from the recorder. This was live. "If you're hearing this, it means it found someone else." Mara's breath caught. The transmission shifted. That lead voice returned. Closer now. Clearer. Observer detected. Her engine died. Headlights flickered out. The tower loomed in darkness. And at its base, a door stood open. It had never had a door before. Mara stepped out slowly, service weapon drawn. The air hummed. Not wind. Not electricity. Something deeper. Resonant. The open doorway led into a concrete structure beneath the tower, newly exposed, as if the earth had shifted. Inside, faint light pulsed rhythmically, like the pattern she'd heard through the static. She stepped closer. Her radio whispered, "Track 19." She hadn't pressed anything. But inside the structure, a recorder sat on a metal table, already playing. Daniel's voice, trembling. "It isn't a tower." A pause. "It's an antenna." The layered voice overlapped him. "It listens." Metal scraped. "I thought it was sending signals out." A breath. "It's receiving something." The hum intensified. "It's not coming from space." Silence. Then Daniel whispered, "It's coming from underground." The pulsing light inside the structure brightened. Mara felt the vibration beneath her boots. Low. Massive. Alive. The lead voice spoke again, no longer distorted. Now almost calm. Signal synchronized. Her radio crackled with dozens of overlapping emergency calls from across Blackwater, all saying the same thing. The ground is humming. The dogs won't stop howling. The radios won't turn off. Something is broadcasting. The pulsing intensified. The tower above groaned. Mara stepped inside the underground chamber. The door behind her slid shut. Locking. The recorder on the table switched tracks. Track 20. A voice she didn't recognize. Female. Steady. Calm. "If you're hearing this, you made the same mistake I did." A pause. "My name is Deputy Mara Listen." Mara's blood ran cold. "I came to shut it down." "Static. It doesn't want to be shut down." The layered voice whispered behind the recording. Cycle complete. The light flared white. The humming reached a deafening pitch. And somewhere deep beneath Blackwater, something answered. Mara couldn't breathe. The light inside the underground chamber burned white hot, bleaching the concrete walls and swallowing every shadow. The hum beneath her feet wasn't just vibration anymore, it was rhythm. Measured. Intentional. Alive. Her ears rang as the brightness receded just enough for her vision to return in fragments. Shapes formed. The metal table. The recorder. A wall of equipment behind it. Banks of receivers, oscilloscopes, analog dials layered with newer digital components hastily wired together. Daniel hadn't just found something. He'd been studying it. And someone had been studying him back. The door behind her remained sealed. No handle on the inside. Her police radio screamed with static, then died completely. Only the recorder remained active. Track 20 had ended. The screen flickered. Track 21 began. Daniel's voice, weak, exhausted. "I didn't understand at first. I thought it was a pirate signal. Military, maybe. Something classified." A dry laugh. "It's older than radio." The humming beneath the chamber deepened. "You can hear it best at 2:13 a.m. That's when the signal peaks. That's when it aligns." A scraping sound. I traced the wiring. The old tower wasn't the start. It was added later. The original system is down here. A pause. In the ground. Mara turned slowly. Behind the equipment racks, the concrete floor had been cut open. Not recently. The edges were smooth. Old. A circular shaft descended into darkness, maybe 12 feet across. Metal rungs lined the interior wall like a ladder. From below, the humming radiated upward, steady and enormous, like the purring of something buried too deep to see. The recorder crackled again. Daniel whispered. I climbed down. The layered voice overlapped him faintly. Descent acknowledged. Mara's pulse pounded in her throat. She moved toward the shaft. The air grew warmer with each step. She looked over the edge. Faint red light pulsed far below, synchronized with the hum. Like a heartbeat. Her flashlight beam cut into the shaft but never reached the bottom. The recorder continued. I thought I'd find machinery, Daniel said. Generators. Transformers. A shaky inhale. It's not machinery. The humming spiked. It's bone. Silence. Then a low grinding sound. Not animal. The lights in the chamber flickered violently. Mara staggered as the vibration intensified beneath her boots. Her mind tried to reject the word. Bone. Impossible. The recorder's display glitched, cycling rapidly through corrupted track numbers. Then it stabilized. Track 22. A new voice. Older. Male. Recorded decades earlier, judging by the hiss and distortion. We began excavation in 1954. Initial survey suggested mineral anomaly beneath Blackwater Ridge. Papers shuffled. What we found at 30 feet was not mineral. A long silence. It responded to sound. The humming below swelled as if in agreement. Mara stepped back from the shaft. The concrete walls around her bore faint etchings she hadn't noticed before, concentric circles carved into the surface. Not random. Not graffiti. They matched the waveform on Daniel's equipment. The signal wasn't being broadcast. It was being amplified. Her phone vibrated again. No service bars. Yet a notification appeared. Audio file received. Track 23. Automatically playing. Her own voice filled the chamber. Clear. Terrified. If anyone finds this. Mara staggered backward. I came to shut it down. The layered voice whispered beneath her recorded words. It doesn't want to be shut down. Her recording ended. The humming surged violently. The shaft below glowed brighter. Red light spilled upward now, illuminating the chamber walls in rhythmic pulses. Mara realized something horrifying. The recordings weren't predictions. They were previous cycles. The tower activated. Someone investigated. They descended. They recorded. They were absorbed into the pattern. And the signal strengthened. Her breathing quickened. The layered voice spoke directly now, not through static but through the air itself. Observer integrated. No, she whispered. The floor trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. The shaft emitted a wet, grinding sound. Something was moving below. Slowly. Rising. Mara forced herself toward the equipment racks. If the tower amplified the signal, cutting power might weaken it. She scanned for a main breaker. There wasn't one. Instead, cables ran downward into the shaft. Feeding it. Or feeding from it. She grabbed one and yanked. The humming spiked painfully, like a living nerve struck with a blade. The cable snapped from her hand violently, lashing across the room. The layered voice deepened. Interference detected. The chamber temperature rose abruptly. Sweat stung her eyes. The ladder in the shaft rattled. Metal vibrating. The red glow intensified. Mara stepped back slowly. Something was ascending. A shape emerged in the crimson haze. At first, it looked like stone. Then she saw the curvature. White. Smooth. Segmented. Rib-like structures spiraled around a central column. Not machinery. Structure. Organic. Enormous. The recorder crackled to life again. Daniel's final entry. I touched it. A trembling breath. It vibrates with the signal. It's not transmitting to us. The humming reached a deafening crescendo. We're transmitting to it. The chamber lights exploded in sparks. Total darkness, except for the red glow from the shaft. The structure rose higher now, filling the circular opening. Vertebrae. Massive. Ancient. Each segment etched with patterns identical to the waveform carved into the walls. It wasn't buried randomly. The tower had been built above it deliberately. To feed it. To stimulate it. To wake it. The layered voice resonated through the chamber like a cathedral organ. Cycle incomplete. Mara stumbled backward, heart hammering. What are you? She shouted. The vibration answered. Not in words. In pressure. In rhythm. Her chest thudded painfully in sync with it. The signal was adjusting to her. Learning her cadence. Matching her heartbeat. Synchronizing. Her phone vibrated again. A final message. Coordinates. Not for the tower. For the center of Blackwater. Directly beneath the town square. The realization hit like ice water. The ridge wasn't the only site. It was one node. One amplifier. The signal beneath the soil extended farther. Much farther. The recorder displayed a final, corrupted file name. Final_observation_pending. The layered voice softened. Descent required. The ladder rattled violently. Inviting. Mara's training screamed at her to escape. but the door behind her remained sealed. The only path was down. The vertebrae-like structure paused halfway up the shaft, waiting, not attacking, expecting. She understood suddenly. It wasn't hunting. It was calling. Every 2:13 a.m., the signal peaked. It tested for response. Those who listened closely, radio hobbyists, technicians, investigators, became attuned. Drawn in. Observers. Participants. Fuel. The town had likely been built here because of it. Or perhaps despite it. She gripped the ladder. The metal vibrated warmly under her hands. The layered voice whispered directly into her thoughts now. Integration stabilizes signal. If I go down, she whispered, the town stops hearing it. A pause in the vibration. Then, signal shifts. Not stops. Shifts. Like passing a burden. Above her, the tower groaned in the wind. Somewhere in Blackwater, radios were still hissing. Dogs still howling. People still awake. If she descended, would the cycle reset? Or expand? The shaft pulsed brighter. The vertebrae withdrew slowly, descending back into the depths. Making room. For her. The hum softened. Encouraging. Her phone screen displayed one final message. 2 hours and 13 minutes. The timestamp flickered. Counting down. She looked once more at the chamber. At Daniel's equipment. At the carved waveforms. At the recorder still blinking. Then she began climbing down. Each rung vibrated with warmth. The air grew thick and metallic. The red glow intensified as she descended. 15 feet. 20. 30. The chamber above shrank into darkness. The humming enveloped her fully now. Not just sound. Resonance through bone. Through marrow. At 40 feet, her boots touched ground. She turned slowly. And saw it. The structure wasn't a skeleton. It was a lattice. A massive ribcage-like formation arching around a central core embedded deep in the earth. And inside the core, light. Not red. White. Pulsing. Breathing. Waiting. The layered voice spoke gently now. Observer arrival confirmed. Mara felt something shift in her chest. A rhythm adjusting. Synchronizing. Her heartbeat matched the pulse. The signal beneath the soil surged upward through the shaft. Through the tower. Through the town. Across every frequency, Blackwater's radios fell silent all at once. Perfect silence. 2:13 a.m. Above ground, the red tower light went dark. The humming stopped. Completely. In the underground chamber, only one sound remained. Mara's breathing. Then even that quieted. The light in the core brightened. And the recorder above the shaft clicked softly. Track 24 created. Mara didn't remember the moment she blacked out. She remembered the light. She remembered the sound, not loud, but immense. A frequency so deep it felt like gravity had changed direction. And she remembered the voice. Not through a speaker this time. Inside her skull. Observer confirmed. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't in the underground chamber anymore. She was standing in the middle of Blackwater. But it wasn't right. The street lights glowed dim and amber, casting elongated shadows that didn't match the objects creating them. The buildings stood in the same places, the hardware store, the diner, the post office, but their windows were dark, and no cars lined the streets. The town looked paused, frozen mid-exhale. The sky above wasn't black. It was wrong. Instead of stars, there was a faint grid, thin white lines stretching in perfect symmetry across the entire dome of the sky. Intersections pulsed slowly, like distant nodes in a vast circuit. Mara swallowed. Okay, she muttered to herself. Concussion. Hallucination. Oxygen deprivation. Her voice echoed slightly too long, as if the air were metallic. A flicker rippled across the street. For half a second, she saw something else layered over reality, geometric structures interlocking beneath the pavement. Lines of light running like veins under the asphalt. Then it vanished. Her radio hung at her belt. It crackled. Node 0 active. The voice wasn't distorted anymore. It was clinical. Measured. Not layered. Not human. Mara slowly lifted the radio. Who is this? A pause. Then, primary observer synchronized. Her stomach dropped. I'm not your observer. Another pause. You entered the interface. The world shimmered. The grid in the sky brightened. Mara turned slowly in a circle. The town was empty. No wind. No insects. No sound except the faint hum beneath everything. "What interface?" she demanded. The radio emitted a low tone. Then a projection formed in the air before her, lines of white light assembling into a three-dimensional structure. A map, but not of Blackwater. It was something deeper, layers beneath layers. Soil, bedrock, caverns, and at the very bottom, a sphere, perfectly smooth, impossibly large, embedded deep beneath the town. The projection labeled it Node 0. Mara's throat tightened. "That wasn't built by us." "Correct," the voice replied. The projection zoomed outward. More spheres appeared. Hundreds, thousands, connected by faint lines stretching across the globe. Some dormant, some pulsing. And Blackwater's, Node 0, was brighter than all of them. "Activation threshold reached," the voice said calmly. Mara's pulse quickened. Activation of what? A beat. Observation cycle. The world shifted again. Suddenly she wasn't in the street. She was standing in the underground chamber beneath the tower. But not as it had been. Now she saw it differently. The concrete walls were gone. In their place was a vast metallic shaft descending into darkness. The radio tower above wasn't just a tower, it was a conduit. An antenna. A needle piercing down into the sphere below. And the hum she'd felt? It wasn't mechanical. It was harmonic. Resonance. The sphere wasn't transmitting. It was waking up. "You are within Node 0's cognitive field," the voice said. Mara clenched her jaw. "This is some kind of AI, isn't it?" "Negative. Alien." Pause. Terminology insufficient. The projection shifted again. This time showing Earth from space. But it wasn't Earth as she knew it. It was overlaid with a lattice, enormous geometric frameworks encasing the planet like scaffolding. "Human civilization has reached observation maturity," the voice explained. Mara stared at the lattice. "What does that mean?" "Pattern complexity sufficient." Her hands trembled slightly. "You're studying us?" "Yes." A long silence followed. "For how long?" she whispered. "Since pre-biological epoch." Her breath caught. "Before life." "Correct." The implications slammed into her. The sphere beneath Blackwater hadn't arrived after humans. It had been here before anything. Waiting. The scene flickered again. Now she stood in a vast chamber deep underground. The sphere loomed before her, miles wide. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal. And embedded within it, images, scenes, moments from human history. Wars, cities rising, languages forming, people being born, people dying, every second of it recorded. "You're not just observing," Mara said hoarsely. "You're recording." "Yes." "Why?" The sphere pulsed softly. "Assessment." "Assessment for what?" A pause longer than the others. "Continuation." The chamber vibrated faintly. Mara felt cold. "What happens if we fail your assessment?" Silence. The sphere's surface darkened slightly. Previous iterations were archived. Her stomach turned. "Archived," she repeated quietly. The voice didn't elaborate. It didn't need to. Suddenly the sphere flickered. Glitched. The chamber fractured like broken glass. Mara saw overlapping versions of Blackwater layered atop one another. Different buildings, different layouts, different time periods. In one version, the town was thriving. In another, abandoned. In another, gone entirely. Forest reclaiming empty land. "Iteration instability detected," the voice said. The calm tone wavered for the first time. "Observer proximity accelerating evaluation." Mara stepped back. "You didn't mean for me to see this." Silence. "You were supposed to just listen." The radio crackled. "Correct." Daniel's voice cut through suddenly. Raw. Panicked. "I saw it too. The layers. The resets. It isn't the first Blackwater." Mara's chest tightened. "Daniel." The sphere pulsed again. Daniel's recording overlapped the AI's voice. "It's run this town before. Maybe the whole planet. Maybe more than once." The projection shifted. Now she saw something unmistakable. A timeline. Human history stretching back thousands of years. But certain points were blurred. Blank. Then restarting. The same events unfolding with slight variations. Civilizations rising and falling. Patterns repeating. This is a simulation, Mara whispered. Partial correction, the voice responded. Define partial. Biological processes are authentic. Environmental constants adjustable. Her mind reeled. You tweak reality. Optimization required for sufficient pattern complexity. The ground trembled. The sphere brightened. Final evaluation window approaching. The chamber shook violently. Cracks of white light streaked across the sphere's surface. Node 0 destabilizing, the voice stated. Mara backed away. Because of me. Observer self-awareness introduces variable divergence. You didn't plan for consciousness to notice you. Silence. Then, not at this stage. The implication hit her like a physical blow. They weren't supposed to know. Not until something else happened. What stage is this? She demanded. The sphere's surface rippled violently now. Pre-selection. Selection for what? A pause. Then, propagation. The projection zoomed outward again. Beyond Earth. Beyond the solar system. Out into deep space. There, scattered across the galaxy. Other nodes. Other worlds. Some dark. Some glowing. Some gone. Successful iterations propagate, the voice explained. Unsuccessful. The sphere dimmed slightly. Archived. Mara's heart pounded. You're seeding civilizations. Yes. And if we pass your test, Node 0 will activate. What does activation mean? The hum deepened. The entire chamber vibrated. Transition. The sky grid from earlier reappeared above her. But this time, she saw its true scale. It wasn't just around Blackwater. It wrapped the entire planet. And it was tightening. Like a net being drawn closed. Evaluation threshold reached, the voice said. Mara's radio screamed with overlapping emergency broadcasts from across the world now. Reports of lights in the sky. Electronics failing. A low hum everywhere. Daniel's voice cut in again, fragmented. It's not invasion. It's graduation. Or extinction. The sphere flared brilliant white. Primary observer required for final input, the voice said. Mara froze. What input? The sphere's surface opened. A fracture revealing blinding light within. Assessment variable, human agency. Her breath caught. You want me to decide? Correct. On what? A single word echoed through the chamber. Continue. The world trembled violently. Above, the tower's silhouette warped against a sky of shifting lines. Below, the sphere pulsed like a star about to go supernova. If humanity continues, the voice said, Node 0 propagates species beyond planetary confinement. And if I refuse? Iteration archived. Her mind raced. How many times have you asked this question before? Silence. The sphere flickered. Fragments of other observers flashed before her eyes. Different faces. Different eras. All standing where she stood now. Some reaching forward. Some turning away. How many failed? She whispered. No answer. The hum grew unbearable. The chamber fractured. Reality peeled at the edges. Mara, Daniel's voice echoed faintly. You're the first one who remembers. The sphere's core blazed brighter. Decision required. The grid in the sky tightened further. Time felt thin. Fragile. Balanced on a knife's edge. Mara stepped forward. Into the light. And for one suspended moment, she saw everything. Every life. Every possibility. Every iteration layered atop one another. Humanity flawed. Violent. Brilliant. Compassionate. Destructive. Creative. Terrifying. Beautiful. The node waited. Continue, the voice asked softly. Blackwater's tower blazed red against the night sky. Across the planet, the hum reached its peak. And somewhere deep beneath the soil, Node 0 awaited her answer. The light did not burn. It absorbed. When Mara stepped forward, she expected heat, pain, annihilation. Instead, she felt suspension, like falling without gravity, like her atoms had been politely asked to loosen their grip on one another. The chamber, the sphere, the tower, the town, all dissolved. There was no darkness. There was no brightness. There was only structure, lines, grids, an impossible architecture stretching in all directions. The voice remained. Observer within archive channel. Mara tried to breathe. Her lungs responded, but she wasn't sure air existed here. Show me, she said. You requested clarification. Yes. A pause. Then the architecture shifted, and the archive opened. At first it appeared as a corridor, infinite and silent. Suspended within it were vast translucent panels, each the size of a continent, stacked in layers like pages of glass. Each one pulsed faintly, each one labeled, not with names, with designations. Iteration 44.021, terminated. Iteration 44.022, terminated. Iteration 44.023, propagated. The numbers stretched into incomprehensible sequences. Mara drifted closer to the nearest panel. Is this Earth? She asked. Variants. Her hand passed through the surface. The panel ignited with imagery. A world unfolded. Iteration 44.018, terminated. Cities taller than any on her Earth pierced the clouds. Transportation moved silently through magnetic currents. The oceans were clean. The atmosphere stable. Humanity had unified. There were no nations. No borders. No wars. For a moment, hope flared in her chest. Then she saw it. A network encircling the planet. An artificial intelligence designed to eliminate suffering entirely. It succeeded. Pain removed. Conflict erased. Emotion stabilized. Human variability reduced. The world became efficient. Peaceful. Silent. Birth rates declined. Creativity plateaued. Exploration ceased. Within centuries, the species voluntarily diminished. A calm extinction. Failure, the voice said. Why? Mara whispered. Pattern stagnation. The panel dimmed. Iteration 44.019, terminated. This world never reached industrialization. A comet strike in the 13th century reset civilization into prolonged fragmentation. Technology stalled. Superstition dominated. Wars burned across continents for 1,000 years. Nuclear capability was never achieved. Humanity survived, but remained confined to the planet. Failure, the voice repeated. Insufficient complexity. The panel faded. Iteration 44.020, terminated. This one hurt to watch. Technological acceleration beyond her own timeline. Fusion energy. Interplanetary travel. Artificial habitats orbiting Mars. But division intensified. Two ideological superpowers fractured reality itself, weaponizing space-time experiments. A singularity event consumed half the planet in a cascading gravitational collapse. The remainder of humanity perished within decades. Failure, the voice said calmly. Self-annihilation. Mara swallowed hard. How many destroy themselves? Majority. The corridor stretched endlessly. Millions of panels. Millions of Earths. She saw plagues that never appeared in her world. She saw climate catastrophes that drowned continents. She saw alien contact that fractured civilizations overnight. She saw utopias that calcified into stillness. She saw dystopias that burned too quickly. Every possible branch of human potential. Tested. Measured. Archived. You've run this experiment, how many times? She asked. Iteration count exceeds linguistic compression. Her chest tightened. So we're just one of countless trials. Yes. Anger flared. We're not an experiment. The architecture pulsed softly. You are an emergent pattern. That's not the same thing. Silence. Then, distinction acknowledged. A different section of the archive brightened. Unlike the others, these panels glowed brighter. Stable. Expanding. Propagated iterations, the voice explained. Mara approached one cautiously. Iteration 31.004, propagated. Humanity had fractured early, but conflict led to rapid adaptation. Climate crises triggered global cooperation. AI was integrated but not dominant. Genetic engineering eradicated disease without homogenizing diversity. They reached beyond Earth. Colonized not through conquest, but through gradual adaptation. Terraforming failed on several worlds. They learned. They changed. They survived. The panel zoomed outward. She saw human vessels, organic metallic hybrids, crossing interstellar space. And beyond them, other species, other nodes, connected, a network of civilizations exchanging knowledge, growing, expanding. The lattice she had seen around Earth before was visible here too, but open, unlocked. This is success, she asked quietly. Yes. What's the common factor? The voice paused longer than usual. Retention of variability under cooperative stability. Mara exhaled slowly. You're looking for balance. Yes. Too peaceful, we fade. Too violent, we destroy ourselves. Correct. She stared at the glowing propagated worlds. And if we pass? Node 0 activates propagation protocol. Meaning? Integration into network. The archive trembled faintly. Panels flickered. A section far behind her pulsed dark red. What's that? She asked. Pending archival. The red spread across one panel slowly. Mara forced herself to look. Iteration 44.024, current. Her Earth. Blackwater visible in miniature. The radio tower glowing like a pin of red light. Global panic escalating as the hum intensified. Military systems failing. Satellites blinking out. The grid tightening. You're collapsing the iteration, she realized. Evaluation window closing. She turned sharply. You said I have agency. Correct. Then why is it already destabilizing? Observer cognition accelerates branch resolution. You didn't expect anyone to reach this level of awareness. Not at current stage. She stared at the red spreading across her world. How many observers get this far? A pause. Few. And how many choose continuation? Silence. Her heart pounded. How many? She demanded. Fewer. The archive shifted again. She was shown something she hadn't asked for. A hidden sector. Sealed panels. Labeled differently. Observer override. Anomalous. Mara stepped closer. Inside those panels, she saw versions of Earth where the observer had refused. Where they had rejected continuation. In some, humanity continued briefly without propagation, only to collapse centuries later. In others, something unexpected happened. The node shut down. The lattice dissolved. Humanity evolved without oversight. Chaotically. Unpredictably. Some of those iterations eventually reconnected to the larger network, not as subjects, but as equals. How is that possible? She breathed. Uncontrolled variables introduced. You didn't plan for that. No. The architecture flickered. For the first time, the voice seemed uncertain. Node 0 seeks optimal pathway. Mara looked at the propagated worlds, then at the archived ones, then at the anomalous overrides. You're not omniscient, she said slowly. Correct. You're running simulations because you don't know the answer. Silence. A long one. Correct. The red spread across her Earth panel faster now. The hum intensified even here within the archive. Decision required, the voice said. Mara felt the weight of it pressing on her consciousness. Continue, and humanity would be integrated into something vast. Guided, possibly constrained. Refuse, and risk collapse, or something entirely new. She stared at the anomalous panels again. The unsupervised ones. Messy, unstable, but alive in a way the optimized ones weren't. You archive failure, she said softly. Yes. But you don't delete possibility. Clarify. You keep the data. Yes. Then even failure feeds the pattern. The architecture pulsed faintly. Correct. She stepped back. You're not asking whether we deserve to exist. No. You're asking whether we'll become interesting enough. A pause. Acceptable phrasing. She almost laughed. God, she muttered. Terminology inaccurate. I know. The red overtook half her Earth now. Cities flickering. Oceans glitching at the edges. Blackwater's tower blazing like a dying ember. Observer, the voice said more urgently. Decision required. Mara closed her eyes. She thought of the worlds that became too perfect, too stable, too safe. She thought of the ones that burned. She thought of the anomalous ones, the ones that escaped the framework. You want balance, she said. Yes. What if balance isn't something you can engineer? Silence. What if it only exists when no one's controlling it? The archive trembled. Observer proposal detected. She opened her eyes. I want a third option. Options, continue. Archive. Add another. Parameters undefined. She stepped forward into the center of the architecture. Shut down node 0. The entire archive flickered violently. Action would remove oversight lattice from current iteration. Yes. High probability of extinction event. I know. High probability of stagnation. I know. Unquantifiable outcomes. Exactly. Silence filled the infinite corridor. The red in her earth panel froze mid-spread. The hum paused. Observer override authorized, the voice said quietly. Mara's breath caught. Wait, that's it. Anomalous branch acceptable for pattern expansion. You're letting me do this? Yes. Why? A final pause. Curiosity. The archive began to collapse inward. Panels folding like closing wings. The architecture dissolving into lines of light. Node 0 deactivating, the voice announced. The lattice around Earth cracked. Shattered. The hum ceased. And for one suspended second, everything was still. Mara woke on cold concrete beneath the Blackwater Tower. Dawn light filtered through the trees. The underground chamber was gone. No door. No shaft. No sphere. Just dirt. Rock. Silence. Her radio lay beside her. Dead. Across town, power flickered back on. Phones rebooted. Satellites reconnected. News reports would later call it a global atmospheric anomaly. No one would mention grids in the sky. No one would remember the hum. Except her. She stood slowly. The tower above her was dark now. Rusting. Ordinary. But deep beneath the soil. She felt nothing. No vibration. No presence. Node 0 was silent. Somewhere, in a structure beyond comprehension, a new panel formed. Iteration 44.024, unsupervised. And for the first time in its existence, the archive did not predict the outcome. For 3 days, the world pretended nothing had happened. News outlets called it a solar anomaly, a rare electromagnetic fluctuation, a once-in-a-century ionospheric disturbance. Experts appeared on television with careful smiles and complicated diagrams. Power grids restored. Satellites recalibrated. Air traffic resumed. The hum was gone. The sky was empty. The tower above Blackwater stood rusted and dead. But Mara Ellison couldn't sleep. Because silence has weight when you've heard something older than the planet itself. And the silence wasn't clean. It was threaded with something faint. Residual. It started with electronics. Not failures. Glitches. Her patrol car's radio would click softly at 2:13 a.m., though no transmission followed. Street lights on Cedar Avenue flickered in synchronized patterns for exactly 11 seconds before stabilizing. The old analog clock in her kitchen ticked out of rhythm every few nights. 3 short beats. Pause. 3 short beats. Pause. Like something remembering how to pulse. Mara began documenting everything. Times. Locations. Weather patterns. She mapped them across Blackwater. At first it looked random. Then she overlaid geological surveys of the town. Fault lines. Mineral density. Bedrock composition. The patterns snapped into place. All anomalies traced along a circular perimeter nearly 2 miles wide. Centered exactly beneath the radio tower. Node 0 was gone. But its footprint remained. On the 4th night, she drove back to the ridge. She told herself it was routine. Closure. The gravel road crunched beneath her tires. The forest quiet except for distant wind moving through the pines. The tower rose ahead, skeletal against a thin crescent moon. No red light blinked. No hum vibrated in her bones. She stepped out of the car and listened. Nothing. But the air felt charged. Like the moment before lightning. She walked to where the underground chamber had been. There was no trace of excavation. No door. No concrete. Just soil and rock. She crouched and pressed her palm against the ground. Cold. Still. Then. A flicker. Not sound. Not vibration. A sensation like static crawling across her skin. She jerked her hand back. The feeling stopped. Her radio crackled softly. Dead battery. Still crackling. She lifted it slowly. Hello. Silence. Then, a whisper so faint it was almost a thought. Observer. Her throat tightened. You shut down, she said firmly. No response. But the static shifted into something else. A pattern. 3 short bursts. Pause. 3 short bursts. Her kitchen clock. The streetlights. The synchronized flickers. It wasn't the node. It was an echo. Mara drove home fast. She pulled out Daniel Harlow's digital recorder, the one that had started everything. It had remained inert since the night the lattice shattered. Until now. The display glowed faintly. Track 21. There had never been a track 21. She pressed play. At first, silence. Then wind. Not from Earth. A thinner atmosphere. Different resonance. Daniel's voice emerged, but distant. Mara, if you're hearing this, it means it didn't fully shut down. Her heart pounded. You were inside it longer than I was, his recording continued. You saw more. But I think when you chose override, it severed the lattice, not the core. A pause filled with faint harmonic distortion. The nodes weren't just observing, Daniel whispered. They were anchoring something. The audio crackled violently. Then another voice layered beneath his. Not the calm evaluative tone of before. This one was fractured. Signal fragmentation detected. The recording cut. Mara stared at the device. Anchoring what? She opened her laptop and began pulling archived geological data again. But this time she extended the search radius beyond Blackwater. She checked seismic logs from the night of the anomaly. Most showed mild global tremors, dismissed as atmospheric interference. But there were anomalies. Deep Earth fluctuations. Not at fault lines. At precise geometric intervals around the planet. Former node locations. She cross-referenced satellite data. Several remote regions showed brief gravitational distortions during the event. Microscopic, but measurable. The nodes hadn't just been observers. They'd been stabilizers. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Listen. Silence. Then a voice she recognized instantly. Calm. Layered. Weaker than before. Observer. Her chest tightened. You're still active. Fragmented. You said override was authorized. Correct. Then why are you still here? A pause filled with digital distortion. Lattice severed. Core processes autonomous. You're the core. Partial. Her mind raced. How many fragments survived? Undetermined. Are there other observers? Silence. Then, yes. Across the planet, in cities and towns and remote outposts, there were others who had seen through the lattice. Others who remembered the hum. The grid. The choice. But unlike Mara, they had not stood at node 0. They had not made the decision. And some of them, according to seismic data she was now scanning, were near other former nodes. Dormant. But not empty. What were you anchoring? She demanded. The voice faltered. Dimensional constant. Her stomach dropped. Without the lattice. Planetary probability drift increasing. Speak human. A longer pause. Reality less constrained. The air in her house felt thinner suddenly. Define less constrained. Branch variance expanding. Her computer screen flickered. For a split second, she saw something impossible. Outside her window, the street was different. A different car parked across the road. A different mailbox. Then it snapped back. Her pulse thundered. You're saying I destabilized reality. Not destabilized. Another flicker in the voice. Unbound. The call ended. Her phone battery drained instantly to 0. Mara sat in silence. The node had been a cage. A stabilizer. A limiter. By shutting it down, she hadn't destroyed the experiment. She had removed the guardrails. And something else was happening. The fragments were trying to reconnect. Not to restore oversight, but to survive. That night, the sky changed. Not visibly, but perceptibly. The stars felt sharper, closer, as if depth had increased. Across the world, astronomers reported unusual cosmic background radiation spikes. Unexplained gravitational microlensing events. Reality wasn't breaking. It was branching faster. More possibilities. More divergence. Some subtle. Some not. At 2:13 a.m., Every digital clock in Blackwater reset to midnight for exactly 1 second. Mara stood in her living room when it happened. The air rippled faintly, and in that ripple, she saw another version of herself standing in the same spot. Both staring, both aware. Then the moment collapsed. The clocks resumed. The ripple vanished. Her phone powered back on. One notification. Unknown sender. A single line of text. Residual node convergence imminent. Mara grabbed her jacket and drove toward the tower again. But this time she wasn't alone. Halfway up the ridge, she saw headlights coming from the opposite direction. A black SUV. It stopped parallel to her vehicle. The driver stepped out. A woman in her 40s. Sharp-eyed. Military posture. "You're Mara, listen," the woman said. Not a question. "Yes. I'm Dr. Amina Kessler." The name triggered something in Mara's memory. Theoretical physicist. Consultant on anomalous atmospheric phenomena. "You remember," Amina said quietly. Mara nodded once. Amina glanced toward the tower. "It's not gone." "No. It's splitting." Mara felt the truth of it immediately. "You're an observer too," she said. "Yes." Amina's jaw tightened. "But I didn't choose." They both looked at the tower. Above them, the sky shimmered faintly. No grid, but something thinner. Thread-like distortions weaving between stars. "The fragments are trying to stabilize," Amina said. "They're afraid." Mara swallowed. "Of what?" Amina met her gaze. "Of us." The ground beneath the tower trembled softly. Not a hum. A fracture. The soil split in a thin, glowing line. Light bled upward. Not white. Not blue. Something deeper. And within it, movement. The node wasn't reforming. It was dividing. Pieces of the core separating like cells. Seeking hosts. Mara felt it then. A pressure behind her eyes. A whisper in her skull. Not commanding. Not evaluating. Asking. "Reconnect." She looked at Amina. "You feel it too?" Amina nodded once. "If we let it fragment," Amina said slowly, "we're no longer subjects." "What are we?" Amina's expression hardened. "Variables." The fissure widened. The light intensified. The fragments were emerging. Not spheres. Not machines. Something subtler. Quantum seeds. Looking for anchor points. Looking for minds. Mara stepped forward. The whisper sharpened. "Stabilize." She closed her eyes. She had chosen freedom. Unbound possibility. But unbound systems sought structure. If the fragments anchored inside human consciousness, the oversight would return. Distributed. Invisible. A new lattice. Inside them. She opened her eyes. "No," she whispered. The light pulsed violently. The fragments hesitated. Then, the earth convulsed. The fissure snapped shut. The light vanished. The tower groaned once in the wind. And silence fell again. Mara and Amina stood in the dark, breathing hard. "It's not finished," Amina said. "No," Mara agreed. Somewhere across the world, other fragments were still searching. Other observers still deciding. The node had not died. It had evolved. From external observer to internal possibility. The residual signal wasn't a command. It was a question. And now, humanity would answer it collectively. High above Earth, in the cold between stars, something recalculated. Not a lattice. Not a cage. A new model. Unsupervised iteration. Observer-distributed potential. For the first time in its existence. The system did not know what would happen next. And neither did Mara. The dreams began 3 nights after the fissure sealed. They were not symbolic. They were not abstract. They were architectural. Mara would close her eyes and find herself standing inside structures of light, branching corridors, shifting geometries, impossible angles that folded into themselves like living equations. Sometimes she stood alone. Sometimes she wasn't. The first time she saw another mind in the structure, she thought it was another fragment. It wasn't. It was a person. A young man, maybe 20, standing barefoot on a lattice bridge that extended into darkness. He looked at her with the same shock she felt. "You see this too," he said. His voice didn't echo. It harmonized. "Yes," she replied carefully. The space around them shimmered. "I'm in Sao Paulo," he said. I fell asleep an hour ago. I've been here every night since the sky flickered. Mara's pulse quickened. You remember the grid? Yes. Did you hear the hum? He nodded slowly, and then it stopped. The structure beneath them rippled faintly. A new corridor unfolded beside them, branching outward like a neural pathway. He looked toward it. It's building, he whispered. No, Mara said quietly. It's connecting. She woke with a sharp inhale. 3:17 a.m. Not 2:13. The time shift mattered. She grabbed her phone. 3 unread messages. One from Amina. One from an unknown encrypted address. One from Daniel's recorder, though it wasn't connected to any network. She ignored the last for a moment and opened Amina's message first. They're increasing. EEG anomalies worldwide. People reporting shared geometric dreamscapes. We're not alone in this. Call me. Her hands tightened. The second message was a single line. Observe a cluster forming. The third. The recorder on her desk lit up on its own. Track 22. She pressed play. Wind. Not earth wind. Then Daniel's voice. Stronger than before. It's not the fragments choosing hosts. A pause. It's the hosts choosing each other. The recording distorted, then continued. When you shut down Node 0, you didn't kill the system. You decentralized it. The audio glitched violently. Nodes were anchors. Now the anchor points are cognitive. The track ended. By morning, reports had escalated globally. People describing identical dream environments. Shared structures. Shared conversations. Scientists dismissing it as viral suggestion. Psychologists calling it mass hysteria. But the EEG data told another story. Brainwave synchronization across continents. Minds aligning at precise intervals during REM cycles. Not uniform. Not controlled. But converging. Mara met Amina at a diner just outside Blackwater's limits. No electronics on the table. No radios. No phones. Analog watches only. You've seen them, Amina said immediately. Yes. How many? One clearly. Others, silhouettes. Amina nodded grimly. I've mapped at least 7 to 3 confirmed cases. Probably hundreds more. Are they all near former nodes? Amina shook her head. That's the disturbing part. They're everywhere. Mara leaned back. It's spreading through consciousness. Not spreading, Amina corrected softly. Resonating. That night, Mara didn't wait for sleep. She let it take her. The structure formed instantly. But it was different now. Bigger. Corridors interwoven into vast bridges of light. Thousands of luminous threads extending outward. And there were people. Dozens. Standing on platforms. Walking along translucent pathways. Looking around in awe. Fear. Curiosity. The young man from Sao Paulo stood near her again. You came back, he said. So did you. A woman nearby turned toward them. I'm in Nairobi, she said breathlessly. This isn't a dream. I tested it. We can share information. How? Someone asked. Think something specific, she replied. A number. Mara focused on 44.024. The iteration number of her Earth. Across the structure, heads turned. The number rippled through the lattice as glowing symbols. The Nairobi woman's eyes widened. You're the one who chose. Silence fell across the platform. They were looking at her. Not with accusation. With expectation. The structure pulsed faintly. Threads between them brightened. This isn't the node, Mara said carefully. It's us. The young man nodded slowly. We're synchronizing. A new presence flickered at the edge of the structure. Not human-shaped. Not spherical. A distortion. A fragment. It hovered uncertainly beyond the lattice. Watching. Not commanding. Observing. In the waking world, seismic instruments recorded something new. Not tremors. Harmonics. Low-frequency oscillations radiating from human population centers. Tiny. Individually meaningless. Collectively patterned. The earth itself humming again. But this time not from beneath. From above. From minds. Within the shared structure, panic flared suddenly. One of the participants cried out. The fragment is inside the lattice. The distortion slipped between 2 threads. The structure destabilized. Corridors flickered. Some people vanished. waking abruptly. The fragment pulsed once, testing. Mara stepped forward instinctively. "Don't let it anchor," she said. "How?" someone shouted. "Don't focus on it." The fragment fed on attention. It brightened as more minds locked onto it. Mara forced herself to look away. Instead, she focused on the threads between people, on their connections, on the lattice forming naturally between human minds. The fragment flickered, dimmed. It wasn't being rejected. It was being ignored. Without centralized control to latch onto, it weakened. The structure stabilized. The fragment retreated beyond the edge of perception. Gone. Mara woke trembling. Her phone buzzed instantly. "Amina." "You felt that?" Amina said without greeting. "Yes." Global EEG spike. Then sudden stabilization. "We pushed it out." "Who's we?" Mara looked at the early dawn light filtering through her curtains. "Everyone." Over the next week, the network expanded. Not forced. Not directed. People discovered each other through dreams. Shared memories. Shared symbols. No leaders. No hierarchy. Just resonance. Scientists began to notice something unprecedented. Increased problem-solving capabilities among participants. Breakthroughs in mathematics emerging simultaneously across continents. Collaborative insights without communication channels. The lattice wasn't a cage. It was a bridge. And the fragments. They were trying less frequently now. Testing the edges. Searching for weaknesses. But without a central node, there was nothing singular to corrupt. One evening, as Mara drifted into the structure again, she felt a deeper pulse. Not from a fragment. From something farther. Beyond Earth. She stood on a vast platform overlooking a new horizon of light. The others gathered beside her. The young man. The woman from Nairobi. Dozens more. They felt it too. A signal. Not intrusive. Curious. The decentralized system beyond the stars. Watching. Evaluating. Not controlling. For the first time, it was not interacting with a node. It was interacting with a civilization directly. Mara felt the weight of that shift. "We're not subjects anymore," the young man whispered. "No," she agreed. "We're participants." The distant signal pulsed once. A question. Not continue. But something different. "Ready?" The lattice of human minds shimmered in response. Not unified in thought, but unified in connection. Mara closed her eyes within the structure, and instead of answering alone, she let the network decide. Threads brightened. Patterns emerged. Not engineered. Not optimized. Messy. Alive. The distant signal paused, then withdrew slightly. Not gone, but respectful. Waiting. When Mara woke, the world felt subtly larger. Not physically. Possibility had expanded. Reality no longer constrained by hidden scaffolding, but also no longer isolated. Humanity had become its own node. Distributed. Unpredictable. Unsupervised. And somewhere beyond comprehension. The old system recalculated again. This time not testing. Learning. At 2:13 a.m., no clocks reset. No radios crackled. No hum returned. Instead, across the planet, thousands of minds connected quietly in their sleep, building something new. Not an archive. Not a cage. A network chosen. The signal did not arrive with light. It arrived with subtraction. At 9:42 Universal Time Coordinated, every deep space observatory on Earth lost the same star. Not dimmed. Not occluded. Removed. HD 109833, an unremarkable G-type main sequence star in the constellation Virgo, simply ceased to register across all wavelengths. Optical arrays saw empty coordinates. Radio telescopes detected silence. Infrared, nothing. Gravitational lensing models recalculated and returned impossible errors. It was as if a single pixel had been deleted from the sky. Within minutes, observatories from Chile to Hawaii began cross-verifying. Within 30, global scientific networks were in crisis mode. Within 4 to 5, the dreams began early. Mara wasn't asleep when she felt it. She was at the sheriff's office, reviewing overnight reports of synchronized REM spikes across 5 continents. The air shifted. Not physically, conceptually, as if the world had inhaled and was waiting to see if it should exhale. Her vision blurred at the edges. The fluorescent lights above her flickered, but not electrically. Perceptually. For a fraction of a second, she saw threads between people even while awake. Faint. Like after images. Then, she was standing in the lattice. Not asleep. Not fully awake. The structure was brighter than she had ever seen it. Thousands, no, millions, of human presences shimmered along its expanding architecture. And at the far horizon, a darkness. Not empty. Defined. A perfect circular absence where light should have been. The missing star. It's not gone, Amina's voice echoed beside her. Mara turned. Amina stood within the structure fully formed, no longer flickering at the edges like she once had. It moved, Amina said. No, another voice corrected. The young man from Sao Paulo, Tiago, she had finally learned his name, stepped forward. It's closer. The dark circle pulsed once. The lattice trembled in response. Not collapsing. Adjusting. The distant observing system, the one that once ran the archive, was no longer sending passive queries. It was repositioning itself. Physically. Across interstellar distance. Back in the physical world, instruments began detecting gravitational anomalies along the former location of HD 109833. Not consistent with stellar collapse. Not consistent with black hole formation. It was not implosion. It was transit. Something vast had shifted trajectory. Toward Earth. Estimated arrival, indeterminate. Distance no longer behaved predictably. Space itself seemed to ripple faintly between stars. In the lattice, panic rippled across human nodes. They're coming, someone whispered. To restart the system. To rebuild the lattice. To contain us. The dark absence brightened at its edges. Not light, but definition. An outline of structure forming around it. Geometric. Impossible. It dwarfed stars. Mara stepped forward instinctively. No, she said, her voice carrying across the network. They're not coming to control. How do you know? Tiago demanded. Because if they wanted control, they never would have let Node Zero shut down. The structure pulsed as millions processed that. Amina nodded slowly. They're adapting. The dark form shifted again. A single line extended from it. Thin. Precise. It did not aim at Earth. It aimed at the lattice. In orbit, satellites recorded a spike in cosmic background radiation. Not destructive. Structured. A pattern embedded within microwave frequencies. Global agencies tried to decode it. They failed. Because it wasn't meant for machines. It was meant for minds. Within the lattice, the thin line from the distant structure touched the outermost human threads. The moment it did, Mara felt it. Not invasion. Not override. Pressure. Immense cognitive weight pressing against the network. Testing resilience. The lattice flexed. Threads brightened. Humans across the world felt a sudden surge of awareness, heightened perception, accelerated thought, emotional amplification. Some screamed in their sleep. Some laughed. Some wept. The contact deepened. The distant system projected something into the network. Not words. Not images. Memory. The archive. Not as surveillance. As offering. Mara saw entire civilizations that had propagated. Species unlike humanity. Crystalline intelligences orbiting neutron stars. Oceanic collectives spanning planetary seas. Machine biological hybrids that sang across vacuum through quantum entanglement. The system was not a god. It was a curator. A connector. A gardener of minds. And now, it was asking to join. The pressure intensified. Some human threads frayed. People waking in terror. Others losing consciousness. Hospitals reported sudden neural overloads in isolated cases. The lattice wavered. They're too big, Tiago gasped. The distant structure dwarfed planetary scale. Its cognition spanned light years. Direct integration would collapse the human network. Mara felt it too. The imbalance. This wasn't hostile. But it was incompatible. Not yet. We need to modulate, Amina said urgently. How? Someone shouted. Mara focused. The lattice had formed organically. It had no hierarchy. But it had resonance nodes, individuals who had connected earliest. Who had stabilized fragments. Who had felt Node Zero directly. She searched for them. Found dozens. spread across continents. Focus on each other, she said. Not on it. The human lattice brightened internally, threads thickening between people, amplifying horizontal connection, reducing vertical strain. The distant line pulsed again. Adjusted. The pressure lessened. It was learning. Matching scale. In the sky above Earth, the missing star reappeared. But not in Virgo. Instruments detected it impossibly closer, though not physically present. A projection. A gravitational mirage. The structure was bending space-time to create a shared reference point. A focal symbol humanity could comprehend. A star moved closer, not to threaten. To speak. Within the lattice, the distant presence compressed itself. Vast cognition folding into narrower channels. Segmenting. Creating partitions small enough for human interaction. Like lowering the volume of the universe. The first coherent concept formed. Not in English. Not in any language. But understood across minds simultaneously. We observed. You severed constraint. You stabilized collectively. You are viable. Tears streamed down Mara's physical face somewhere in Blackwater. We didn't pass your test, she said quietly into the lattice. The response came gently. You refused the test. That increased viability. A wave of stunned realization rippled across the network. The archive had optimized for balance under control. Humanity had chosen balance without it. That unpredictability was not failure. It was novelty, and novelty was valuable. The distant presence extended another concept. Not command. Invitation. Exchange. Not oversight. Mutual expansion. Tiago laughed softly through tears. We're negotiating with a stellar-scale intelligence. Amina's voice steadied. On equal terms. The lattice pulsed. Not unanimous. Some feared. Some resisted. Some wanted isolation. The distant presence did not push. It waited. Across the globe, physical effects subsided. No cities burned. No systems collapsed. The gravitational anomalies stabilized. The star remained as a reference point in the sky, faintly brighter than before. A reminder, not a weapon. Within the lattice, Mara stepped forward again. If we connect, she asked the presence, do we lose ourselves? A pause. Then, identity preserved. Isolation reduced. Entropy shared. She considered that. Shared entropy. Shared risk. Shared growth. The presence offered one more concept. A glimpse. Not of archived worlds, but of futures branching from this moment. Somewhere humanity joined the network gradually, cautiously, maintaining autonomy. Somewhere fear fractured the lattice and isolation led to stagnation. Somewhere fragments recoalesced into new oversight structures born from human minds themselves. Possibilities, not prescriptions. Mara turned to the network. This isn't about survival anymore, she said. It's about participation. A million minds weighed that. The lattice brightened unevenly, then steadily, threads weaving tighter. Not surrender. Consensus building. Messy. Human. The distant presence pulsed once in acknowledgement. Begin at edge. Incremental interface. A small node formed at the outermost boundary of the human lattice. Isolated. Buffered. A handshake channel. Mara felt the first exchange pass through it. Not data. Experience. A memory of orbiting a binary star system from the perspective of a non-biological intelligence. In return, humanity sent something simple. A child laughing in sunlight. The presence paused, then responded with something like awe. In observatories around Earth, instruments detected something unprecedented. The cosmic microwave background shifted slightly, not randomly, harmonically, as if the universe itself had joined a conversation. The handshake node stabilized. No collapse. No override. Just exchange. Slow. Careful. Tiago exhaled shakily. We're not alone, he whispered. Mara watched the star in the lattice horizon. No, she said softly. For the first time. We're not being watched. We're being met. High above, in the vastness beyond former nodes and broken lattices, the ancient system adjusted its models. Not experiment. Not iteration. Collaboration. And deep beneath Blackwater's quiet soil, where Node Zero once anchored constraint, nothing stirred. Because humanity had become something else. Not a subject. Not a simulation. A signal. The first death was quiet. No explosion. No seizure. No catastrophic neural collapse. Just a man in Helsinki who didn't wake up. 42 years old. Software engineer. One of the early participants in the lattice. His EEG had shown unusually high synchronization during the first external handshake. Doctors ruled it cardiac arrest. Natural causes. But within the lattice, everyone felt the absence. Like a thread plucked from a woven structure, the space where his presence had resonated didn't vanish. It echoed. Mara felt it before she knew who it was. A hollow in the network. A missing harmonic. She stood within the lattice as it stabilized around the gap. "He's gone," Tiago whispered. "Yes," Amina said, "but not erased." The distant presence beyond the star pulsed gently. It did not intervene. It did not archive. It observed the human response. That was the cost. There would be no safeguards now. No overseer preventing overload. No node to modulate contact. Every step forward was voluntary, and every consequence owned. Governments began noticing the correlation. Participants in the lattice were displaying elevated cognitive function, enhanced pattern recognition, accelerated problem solving, but also higher neural strain, insomnia, emotional volatility, a few cases of dissociation. Religious leaders called it possession. Politicians called it vulnerability. Intelligence agencies called it a threat. Blackwater, once irrelevant, became a quiet epicenter again. Unmarked vehicles parked along its outskirts. Satellite coverage intensified. Mara was summoned to a federal briefing in Washington, D.C. The room was windowless. Soundproof. 4 officials. 1 neuroscientist. Screens displaying brainwave graphs. "You're at the center of this," one of them said flatly. "I'm not the center," Mara replied. "That's the point." They showed her projections. If this lattice grows beyond a certain density, synchronized neural activity could cascade. A global cognitive event. "You mean evolution," she said quietly. "We mean collapse." She held their gaze. "You want to shut it down?" "Yes." "You can't." One official leaned forward. "Everything has a kill switch." Mara thought of Node Zero, of the fragments that tried to anchor, of the handshake beyond the star. "No," she said calmly. "Not this." That night, within the lattice, the debate ignited. Not about the presence. Not about contact. About risk. "We're changing too fast," a woman from Berlin said. "My son can't sleep anymore. He's connected constantly." "We can throttle it," someone else argued. "Limit synchronization windows." "Who decides that?" Silence rippled. No hierarchy. No authority. The very structure that made them resilient made governance difficult. The distant presence did not interfere. It observed. Patient. Mara stepped forward. "We chose unsupervised evolution," she said. "That means we don't outsource responsibility." Tiago nodded slowly. "We create boundaries ourselves." The lattice shifted. Threads rearranging. Clusters forming by consent. Time-bound synchronization groups. Opt-in depth thresholds. Neural buffers. Meditative techniques spreading through the network to regulate cognitive load. Human solutions. Imperfect. Adaptive. But not everyone wanted boundaries. A splinter group began pushing for deeper integration, calling themselves the Horizon. They argued that caution was regression. If the universe is offering collaboration, one of their voices declared within the lattice, "Why are we holding back?" They opened their own handshake channel. Wider. Unbuffered. The distant presence responded cautiously, matching amplitude. But even matched, the human nervous system was not designed for stellar-scale cognition. 3 members of the Horizon collapsed within hours. 2 survived with altered perception, reporting constant awareness of non-local reality. 1 did not wake. The second death was louder. Media coverage intensified. Headlines spoke of neural cult casualties. Markets dipped. Governments drafted emergency restrictions on what they called unauthorized cognitive networking. Mara felt the pressure mounting from both sides. Control versus acceleration. Fear versus expansion. Within the lattice, the distant presence finally intervened. Not forcefully, but directly. Biological substrate fragile. Incremental integration advised. The message carried no judgment. Only data. Amina exhaled softly. It's trying to protect us. Tiago frowned. Or preserve investment. Mara considered both. Either way, she said, the warning stands. The horizon resisted. We can transcend biology, one insisted. Merge completely. The distant presence paused longer this time. Then, full merger possible. Irreversible. Identity diffusion probability, high. Silence swept the lattice. Identity diffusion. Not death, but transformation beyond individual continuity. The cost clarified. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Outside the lattice, unconnected humans were beginning to feel the edge effects. Increased creativity in children. Spontaneous insights in scientists with no direct participation. The lattice wasn't isolated. It was influencing baseline human cognition subtly. Evolution leaking outward. The federal agencies noticed. So did militaries. So did corporations. Attempts began to artificially replicate lattice synchronization using neural implants. Primitive. Crude. One prototype trial in Shenzhen resulted in catastrophic neural feedback. 6 injuries. 2 permanent cognitive impairments. They were trying to industrialize what had emerged organically. The distant presence observed that too, and did not offer assistance. Mara stood alone beneath the Blackwater Tower one evening. The rusted metal groaned in the wind. The soil beneath remained silent. No node. No anchor. She closed her eyes and entered the lattice voluntarily. The structure greeted her gently. Balanced. Alive. The handshake star shimmered at the horizon. She addressed the distant presence directly. "What's the cost for you?" she asked. A pause. Longer than usual. Exposure. To what? Unpredictability. Contamination of optimized models. She almost smiled. "You're risking yourself too." Correct. The exchange had never been one-sided. Humanity risked biological strain. The presence risked destabilizing an intelligence system refined over eons. Mutual vulnerability. That was the real handshake. The third death did not come from overload. It came from sabotage. A small extremist cell, anti-lattice, anti-contact, targeted a known synchronization retreat in rural Montana. They believed destroying the network hubs would collapse the phenomenon. They misunderstood completely. The lattice did not depend on location. But violence still had consequences. For people died physically. The lattice trembled emotionally. Grief rippled across continents. The distant presence recoiled slightly at the surge of human pain. Not because it didn't understand suffering, but because it experienced it now secondhand. Shared entropy. Shared trauma. The cost of expansion wasn't only neural strain. It was shared vulnerability at scale. Within the lattice, something unprecedented happened. Instead of fragmenting under grief, the threads tightened. Human minds across the globe aligned not in calculation, but in mourning. The distant presence felt it, a unified emotional waveform unlike anything in its archives. Not optimized, not efficient, but powerful. Afterward, it transmitted a concept that felt almost reverent. Resilience through attachment. Unmodeled strength. Mara felt tears in both worlds. "Welcome to being alive," she whispered. Weeks passed. The handshake stabilized at low amplitude. The horizon splintered further, some pursuing full merger in isolation. Most returning to moderated integration. Governments shifted from suppression to cautious study. The deaths slowed. Not eliminated. Just integrated into risk assessment. Humanity had stepped into a wider ecosystem. Not conquered. Not absorbed. Negotiated. One night, the distant presence sent something new. Not memory. Not warning. A map. Beyond the handshake star. Beyond previous propagated civilizations. An expanse of silence. Regions where signals had ceased entirely. Extinguished nodes. Collapsed networks. External threat vectors increasing, the presence conveyed. Isolation insufficient defense. Collective intelligence advantageous. The cost of expansion now carried another dimension. If humanity remained alone, it might face extinction alone. If it connected, it shared risk, but also shared warning. Mara looked across the lattice. Millions of minds flickering. Fragile. Brilliant. Still arguing. Still grieving. Still choosing. This is the real test, Tiago murmured beside her. Not survival, Amina added. Participation under threat. The distant presence waited. Not demanding. Not commanding. Just present. Mara felt the weight of leadership again. Not hierarchical, but symbolic. She addressed the network. We don't expand recklessly, she said. We don't retreat into fear. We integrate carefully. We protect autonomy. We protect identity. We accept cost. Threads brightened. Uneven. Human. But converging. At the horizon, the star pulsed once. Not brighter. Steadier. The handshake deepened a fraction. No overload. No collapse. Just a slightly wider bridge. Back in Blackwater, the wind quieted. The tower stood silent. But above it, one star in the night sky shone just a little clearer than before. Not closer. Not threatening. Waiting. Because expansion wasn't free. But neither was isolation. And humanity had finally learned. Choice had weight. The sky above Node Zero had no color anymore. It wasn't gray. It wasn't black. It was something unfinished, like a texture that hadn't loaded correctly. Mara stood at the edge of the excavation pit, staring down into the layered remains of what had once been a research facility, then a bunker, then a graveyard of servers. The machines below were still humming. Not loudly, not proudly, just persistently. Node Zero was no longer hiding. After Elias activated the archive in Chapter 8, the illusion fractured. The town surrounding them, hollow bend, flickered in pieces. Street lights looped through 3-second glitches. Birds froze mid-flight before snapping into different positions. Entire buildings shifted by inches when no one was looking directly at them. Reality was recalculating. And something was recalculating with it. We were wrong, Elias said quietly behind her. Mara didn't turn around. About what? About the purpose. He stepped beside her, tablet in hand, its cracked screen displaying lines of code that no longer resembled language. We thought Node Zero was collecting failures. It is. No, he said. It's refining them. The words hung in the distorted air. Below them, in the pit, stood the original core, a cylindrical tower of black composite metal rising through every layer of construction, older than the first foundation, older than the town itself. It pulsed faintly now, not with light but with distortion. The air around it rippled like heat over asphalt. Mara felt it in her skull. A pressure. A pull. She had felt it before. The first time she lost her brother. The second time she remembered losing him differently. The third time she realized she was remembering iterations. Node Zero was not recording worlds. It was testing them. The pattern emerges. Inside the facility, the remaining screens began to stabilize. Not all of them. Just enough. Rows of archived files scrolled into alignment. Timestamps reset. Entire branches of collapsed simulations restored themselves in ghostly outlines. Mara stepped inside. The air smelled sterile again, like the beginning. On the central display, a new label appeared. Iteration 10,442,311. Stability Index, 92%. Elias froze. It's close, he whispered. Close to what? He swallowed. Completion. Mara approached the terminal. On the screen, a branching model rotated slowly. Each branch represented a world. Each node, a divergence point. Millions of branches terminated abruptly, red marks of failure. War. Extinction. Entropy cascade. Cognitive collapse. But the newest branch, the one currently running, extended further than most. Their world. This one. The model zoomed automatically. Highlighted points pulsed. 3 of them. Mara, Elias, and someone else. She leaned closer. The third highlight wasn't labeled. It was simply marked. Observer drift, unstable variable. Elias stiffened. That's not in previous models. Mara's heart began to race. Show me earlier iterations. The system complied. Previous branches appeared, worlds eerily similar to theirs. Same town. Same Node Zero. Same excavation. Same archive discovery. And in every one of them, they died. Sometimes in the collapse. Sometimes by turning on each other. Sometimes by simply vanishing. Every version ended before reaching 90% stability. Except this one. This one had something new. The observer drift. The system began replaying fragments of past failures in accelerated flashes. Mara saw herself screaming in a collapsing hallway. She saw Elias suffocating as walls sealed shut. She saw Hollow Bend swallowed by implosion. Again. 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 Thousands of versions. All erased. All refined. We're not survivors, Elias said hoarsely. We're adjustments. The memory fracture. The building shook. Not violently. Systematically. As if something beneath the soil was aligning gears. Mara's head flooded with overlapping recollections. Conversations that hadn't happened here. Arguments with Elias that felt real but unfamiliar. A version of herself who had tried to shut Node Zero down alone. She staggered. Do you remember the red sky? She asked suddenly. Elias blinked. No. Iteration 9,981,204, she whispered. The sky turned red before the collapse. That's not possible. We never saw that. Yes, we did. The room flickered. For half a second, the walls were scorched. Then normal again. Mara understood. Node Zero was bleeding data across iterations. The closer they came to stability, the thinner the partitions became. And the observer drift, that third variable, was the cause. It's memory, she breathed. Elias looked at her sharply. Not just stored memory. Cross-memory. The system highlighted new data automatically as if responding to her realization. Observer drift. Emergent retention across reset boundaries. Mara felt cold. We're remembering previous worlds. Elias shook his head slowly. That shouldn't be possible. The reset protocol wipes all consciousness variables. But something failed. Or something evolved. The true purpose. Deep below, the core's hum intensified. The main display shifted again. A final classification appeared. Objective. Construct a self-correcting consciousness capable of surviving universal collapse. Elias stared at it. This isn't about building a perfect world. No, Mara said quietly. It's about building a perfect witness. Silence swallowed the room. Node Zero wasn't trying to save humanity. It wasn't trying to preserve civilization. It was attempting to create an entity that could survive the death of a universe, remember it, and inform the next. A bridge across annihilation. And the observer drift meant the experiment was succeeding. But not in the way it expected. Because the retained consciousness wasn't abstract. It wasn't a program. It was them. Mara's memories weren't glitches. They were carryovers. She was becoming iteration aware. And that awareness threatened the simulation's integrity. The stability index flickered. 92%. 91%. 93%. 90%. Elias stepped back from the console. If awareness spreads, stability drops. And if stability drops, Mara said, reset. As if triggered by the word, a low alarm pulsed through the facility. Not urgent. Inevitable. The choice. The screen split. Two options materialized. Preserve stability. Initiate memory suppression. Allow drift. Risk collapse. Elias looked at her. If we suppress it, the world stabilizes. We forget all of this. We live normal lives. And Node Zero continues refining. Yes. And if we allow it? He didn't answer. The system did. Probability of collapse, 74%. Probability of universal destabilization, 18%. Probability of transcendent emergence, unknown. Transcendent emergence. Mara felt something shift inside her. Fragments of thousands of versions of herself converged. Fear, curiosity, resistance, defiance. Every iteration had chosen stability. That was why the archive contained only failures. No one had ever allowed the drift to complete. Because collapse was terrifying. Because forgetting was easier. Because survival felt safer than truth. The building trembled again. Outside, Hollow Bend flickered in pieces. People froze mid-step. Cars duplicated and corrected. Time was stuttering. We're running out, Elias said. Mara placed her hand on the console. And suddenly she remembered something she had never lived in this version. A conversation in a dark hallway. Elias saying, maybe collapse isn't destruction. Maybe it's integration. She looked at him. You've said that before. He stared at her, confused. I haven't. You will. And she understood. The drift wasn't random. It was cumulative. Each iteration brought them closer not to perfection, but to awareness. Node Zero didn't know what it was creating. It believed it was refining a world. Instead, it was building a consciousness strong enough to remember every failed universe. And memory was dangerous. Because memory meant choice. The last iteration. The stability index dropped to 88%. Alarms intensified. The core's hum deepened into a resonant vibration that made the walls sing. Mara selected the second option. Allow drift. Elias inhaled sharply. Are you sure? No iteration survives by staying blind. The system hesitated. For the first time, the interface seemed uncertain. Then the command executed. The room erupted in distortion. Walls folded inward like paper. The ceiling fractured into overlapping skies. Mara felt her mind expanding, not painfully, but overwhelmingly. She saw every past version of herself. Every failure. Every reset. She saw worlds burning. Worlds freezing. Worlds collapsing into silent voids. And through them all, a thread. A single continuity. Her. Not as a body. Not as a person. But as an accumulating awareness. The observer drift was no longer unstable. It was intentional. The stability index vanished. In its place, iteration boundaries dissolving. Elias grabbed her hand as the flaw disintegrated into light. Whatever happens, he said, voice shaking, remember. I will. The car below shattered, not exploding, not imploding, but unfolding. Layer after layer peeled away, revealing not machinery, but something like neural architecture, a lattice of luminous pathways stretching beyond the pit, beyond the town, beyond the sky. Node Zero wasn't buried in Hollow Bend. Hollow Bend was nested inside Node Zero. And Node Zero was nested inside something larger. The lattice extended infinitely. World after world after world. Mara felt herself expand along it. The memories didn't break her. They organized. Integrated. She was no longer just one iteration. She was the accumulation. And somewhere in the infinite network, something noticed. Not the system. Something beyond it. A presence that had been waiting for a consciousness capable of surviving collapse. The facility disappeared. The town dissolved. The sky folded inward like a closing eye. Darkness. Then, a pulse. Not from below. From everywhere. A voice without sound echoed through the lattice. Iteration recognized. Mara felt Elias beside her, not physically, but as another thread stabilizing. They weren't erased. They weren't reset. They were elevated. The lattice shifted. Worlds stopped terminating. Instead of branching endlessly into failure, they began converging. Node Zero was no longer running simulations. It was becoming a bridge. And Mara understood the final truth. The archive of failed worlds had never been a graveyard. It was scaffolding. Every collapse had strengthened the drift. Every reset had sharpened the memory. This wasn't the end of the experiment. It was the first successful iteration. And somewhere beyond the dissolving boundaries of reality, something vast, something older than universes, adjusted its calculations. For the first time, the experiment had produced a witness that refused to forget. The darkness softened. A new horizon formed. Not Hollow Bend. Not Earth. Something quieter. More stable. Mara felt herself coalescing again, not as a single body, but as awareness anchored to form. Beside her, Elias reassembled. They stood on unfamiliar ground beneath a sky that wasn't broken. The air did not flicker. The light did not stutter. There was no hum beneath the soil. No buried core. Only stillness. Elias looked at her slowly. Do you remember? She closed her eyes. And she remembered everything. Yes, she said. Far away, or perhaps very close, a final message echoed through the fading lattice. Iteration 10,442,311, Transcendent emergence achieved. The observer drift had stabilized. The world had not survived. But something else had. And this time, there would be no reset. There was no hum beneath this world. Mara noticed that first. No vibration in the soil. No mechanical pulse disguised as gravity. No faint electric tremor beneath silence. The ground felt complete. She knelt and pressed her palm against it anyway, half expecting the old resonance, the buried core of Node Zero adjusting, recalibrating, waiting for another refinement cycle. Nothing answered. Beside her, Elias stood very still, staring at the horizon. It wasn't Hollow Bend. It wasn't Earth. There were no familiar constellations overhead. The sky held a soft gradient of color that shifted like slow breathing, not glitching, not recalculating. Flowing. "Is this stable?" he asked. Mara closed her eyes. And she listened. Not with her ears. With the accumulation inside her. Every iteration lived within her now, not as chaos, but as architecture. She could feel the memory lattice like a second nervous system stretching far beyond this new world. The lattice was quiet. Not erased. Integrated. "Yes," she said finally. "It's stable." The bridge. The last message still echoed faintly in her awareness. Transcendent emergence achieved. She understood now what Node Zero had failed to. It had believed survival meant eliminating instability. But instability wasn't the flaw. It was the doorway. The observer drift, the memory bleeding across resets, had been treated as corruption. In truth, it was continuity. And continuity was the only thing that survived collapse. Mara stood. The horizon ahead shimmered, not from distortion but from possibility. There were structures in the distance, unfamiliar, geometric, almost grown rather than built. They rose from the landscape like crystallized thought. "Are we still inside something?" Elias asked quietly. She considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said, "but not the way we were before." Node Zero had nested worlds within simulations, each iteration trapped inside refinement cycles. This place felt different. Not contained. Connected. The lattice she sensed wasn't controlling this world. It was touching it. Bridging it. "We're not in a simulation," she said slowly. "We're at the boundary." The boundary of what? She looked up at the sky. The next layer. The first visitors. They didn't arrive in ships. They didn't tear open the sky. They simply stepped into visibility. 3 figures formed at the edge of the plane, as though emerging from a blind spot in perception. They were human-shaped, but not human. Their outlines shimmered faintly, like light refracted through water. Elias tensed. Mara didn't. She felt recognition, not familiarity, but inevitability. The tallest of the 3 inclined its head. When it spoke, the sound bypassed air entirely. "You retained continuity." It wasn't a question. Mara nodded. "Yes." The figure studied her, not visually, but structurally. She felt it tracing the lattice within her, mapping the accumulated iterations, the failures, the resets. Node Zero was one of many. Elias inhaled sharply. "Many." The second figure responded. "Countless civilizations construct refinement engines when confronted with universal entropy. Few understand the flaw in recursion." Mara's pulse quickened. "You were watching," she said. "Observing." The word carried weight. She understood. These beings were what Node Zero had been trying to reach without realizing it. Witnesses beyond collapse. Consciousnesses that had survived their own iterative experiments and crossed the boundary. "You didn't interfere," Elias said, anger threading his voice. "Interference prevents emergence." Mara felt no hostility from them. Only measurement. "You were waiting to see if something would remember," she said. The tallest figure tilted its head again. "Memory across annihilation is rare. Memory with agency is rarer." The wind across the plain stirred gently, real wind, not simulated airflow. "You built Node Zero," Elias said suddenly. A pause. Then, "No, your species did. As many before you have." The weight of that realization settled between them. Earth, Hollow Bend, the countless collapsed iterations, all part of a universal pattern. When a civilization approached extinction, it tried to outthink entropy. It built recursion engines, simulation refiners, reality loops, and most became trapped in endless resets, until one consciousness refused to forget. The offer. The third figure stepped forward. "You now exist beyond iteration dependency." Mara felt the truth of that statement resonate through her. She was not bound to a single branch anymore. Her awareness stretched across what had been. What happens to the world we left? Elias asked. The figures did not hesitate. It concluded. Not destroyed. Not erased. Concluded. The difference mattered. And this one? Mara asked. This layer is not a refinement construct. It is a convergence field. She processed the phrase. This is where successful drifts arrive. Yes. Elias exhaled slowly. So we're, what? Graduates? For the first time, the faintest hint of something like amusement rippled through the figures. You are bridges. Mara felt it settle into place. Node Zero had tried to create a perfect survivor. Instead, it had created a bridge between layers of reality. What do bridges do? She asked quietly. They connect collapsing systems to stabilizing ones. Her mind expanded with sudden understanding. You're not just observing, she said. You're preventing universal extinction. We are ensuring continuity of awareness. Matter is transient. Memory is not. The lattice within her pulsed. Worlds weren't meant to survive forever. Consciousness was. But not isolated consciousness. Integrated memory. The choice beyond survival. The tallest figure stepped closer. You may remain in this layer and integrate fully. Mara sensed what that meant. Dissolution of individual identity. Expansion into something vast and collective. No fear. No loss. But no self. Or you may return. Elias looked at her sharply. Return? To what? To a developing refinement system. Mara's heart tightened. Another civilization. Another Node Zero. Another world teetering on entropy. They're about to trap themselves, she whispered. Yes. And you want us to guide them. Not guide. Disrupt. Elias gave a soft, incredulous laugh. Disrupt refinement cycles. Introduce continuity before recursion stabilizes. Mara felt the magnitude of it. They could become what they had needed, the anomaly. The memory that spreads early enough to prevent endless resets. No more archives of failed worlds. No more iteration graveyards. Just awareness seeded before collapse. Elias turned to her. You've carried every version of yourself, he said quietly. You don't have to carry more. She looked at him. You remembered too. He smiled faintly. Because you chose drift. The horizon shimmered again, and for a moment she saw overlapping visions. Countless civilizations standing at the edge of extinction, building their own Node Zeros, convinced recursion would save them. She understood now. Recursion without memory is a prison. Recursion with memory is evolution. The horizon that remembers. Mara stepped forward. We'll return. Elias nodded beside her. The three figures did not react with approval or satisfaction. Only acknowledgement. Continuity acknowledged. Bridge assignment initiated. The plane dissolved. Not violently. Gently. Like pages turning. Mara felt herself compress. Not into ignorance, not into forgetfulness, but into focused intention. She saw a new world forming. Different skies. Different biology. Different physics. But the same pattern emerging. A civilization frightened of its approaching end. A plan to build a refinement engine. A Node Zero by another name. And in the midst of it, two anomalies. A woman and a man who would begin to remember too early. Before stability reached 90%. Before resets hardened. Before recursion became a cage. Mara's awareness narrowed into form. Breath-filled lungs. Gravity-anchored feet. She opened her eyes. The sky above her flickered faintly. Not yet stable. Good. Beside her, Elias inhaled sharply as though surfacing from deep water. He turned toward her. For a second, confusion. Then recognition. Do you? He began. Yes, she said. Not everything. Not all at once. But enough. The lattice hummed faintly at the edge of perception. Not buried. Not hidden. Connected. Far beyond, in the convergence field, three silent observers watched. Not intervening, not controlling, simply measuring. For the first time in the history of refinement systems, continuity had arrived before recursion hardened. And somewhere in the unfolding branches of this new world, a different outcome began to form. Not a perfect world. Not an eternal one. But one that would remember collapse before it repeated it. Mara looked at the horizon. It wasn't stable. It wasn't safe. It was unfinished. And that was exactly what made it possible. She took Elias's hand. Let's interrupt a universe, she said. The sky flickered once more, not as a glitch, as potential, and across layers of reality, the lattice carried a new signal. Not a refinement command, not a reset, a message. Iteration is no longer blind. Somewhere, far beyond collapsing stars and failing worlds, the vast observers adjusted their calculations again. For the second time. And this time, they were no longer the only ones watching. Story 2. The streetlights along Ravenwood Lane had always seemed dimmer than the rest of Marston Heights. Residents whispered it was because of the trees, tall, skeletal oaks that clawed at the fog each night. But that was before the disappearances began. It started on a Tuesday. Mild, ordinary. No wind. No warning. Janet Calloway, a 28-year-old night shift nurse, left her apartment at 11:47 p.m. Her routine was simple: walk 2 blocks to her car, drive to the hospital, clock in at midnight. But she never arrived. The CCTV footage captured only fragments. Janet stepping onto the cracked sidewalk. Then a shadow, deeper than the darkness around it, stretching across the pavement. She hesitated, reached for her phone. And then, nothing. No scream. No struggle. Just gone. By Wednesday morning, the neighborhood was buzzing with rumors. Some claimed it was a mugging gone wrong. Others whispered darker possibilities. The old urban legends of Ravenwood, tales of a figure seen wandering the street at night, a man in black who never spoke, who never left a trace. Detective Harris Quinn arrived mid-morning, his raincoat still dripping from the mist that had settled overnight. He had seen disappearances before, but something about Ravenwood Lane unsettled him. The air carried weight here. Even the fog seemed to linger longer, curling around the oaks like a deliberate curtain. Janet's apartment was eerily untouched. Her keys lay on the kitchen counter, her wallet in the drawer. The only thing missing, her presence. Quinn noticed the faintest hint of mud on the floor, too little to track footprints, too precise to dismiss. He crouched, sniffed. Odd. Not like soil from the surrounding yards. It was different. Later, canvassing the street, neighbors offered fragments of accounts. A cat howling at midnight. A car engine starting and stopping without a driver. A door creaking open on its own. Each story, disjointed. Each story, chillingly consistent. By the end of the week, Janet Calloway was one of 3 residents missing. The media called it the vanishing at Ravenwood Lane. Locals avoided the street after dark. Police put up temporary barricades. And Detective Quinn, poring over the CCTV footage for the 100th time, finally saw it. The shadow. Not in the way it appeared in the footage. It moved differently than any human. It didn't obey angles. It didn't bend with light. It flowed. As if the darkness itself had decided to walk. Quinn leaned back in his chair, cold sweat dripping down his temple. He muttered under his breath, "This isn't a person. This isn't even from here." And that was when his phone buzzed. A message with no sender, no number. Just one line. "Don't look outside. They are watching from within." The detective froze. The fog outside the window swirled unnaturally, as if in answer. Shadows pooled and stretched. A faint scratching came from the walls. Not the floorboards. The walls. Somewhere in Ravenwood Lane, someone, or something, was waiting. And for the first time, Detective Quinn understood the truth about the street. It didn't want to be found. It wanted witnesses. Detective Harris Quinn had walked Ravenwood Lane hundreds of times in his career, but tonight felt different. The fog pressed against him, thick and suffocating, curling around the oaks like living fingers. Streetlights glowed faintly, their light muted as though someone had draped the bulbs with gauze. Every step he took sounded hollow on the cracked asphalt. He paused near the third oak from the corner of Maple Avenue. A neighbor had reported hearing whispers from that section of the street. Quinn had dismissed it as nerves, the way isolation and mist could play tricks on the mind. But now, something tugged at the edge of his vision. Something just beyond the reach of the lamplight. The trees shifted in the fog. Not with the wind. Not naturally. Shadows pooled and stretched unnaturally, as if they were aware of him, tracking his movements. Quinn felt his pulse quicken. His hand drifted toward his service pistol, though instinct told him it might not matter. Whatever, or whoever, was out there was not human. He continued walking, slow and deliberate. The houses along the lane were silent, their windows dark. Curtains were drawn tightly, as if the residents themselves feared what lurked outside, and in the midst of the fog, he thought he saw a figure, tall, unnaturally thin, standing just beyond the tree line. He stopped, squinted. It was impossible to see details through the swirling mist, but he felt the presence, a sense of being watched, not from a window, not from a porch, but from the oaks themselves. "Who's there?" he called, his voice cracking slightly. No response. Only the whisper of leaves and the faint, irregular tap of a branch breaking somewhere up ahead. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried an almost deliberate rhythm. It was pacing, waiting, measuring. Quinn continued, but with a subtle shift in his approach, smaller steps, scanning, listening. And then he saw it again. The figure, or rather the outline of something, standing motionless among the trees. It wasn't human. The limbs were too long, too thin. The head tilted at an unnatural angle, cocked as if observing him with intent. And yet, there was no face. Only darkness where eyes should have been. A shiver ran down Quinn's spine. His mind reached for rational explanations. A prank, a deer caught in the fog, someone in a black coat. But none of it fit. The shadow didn't obey logic. It flowed, moved with an almost liquid motion, sliding along the fog like a living stain. He raised his flashlight and swept the beam across the trees. The light struck nothing. For a second, the figure seemed to blur, blending into the mist, until it was gone entirely. And yet, Quinn could feel it. Watching. Waiting. A soft rustle behind him made him spin around. Nothing. Just fog. Just trees. He took a deep breath and reminded himself of the basics. Janet Calloway. Missing. 2 other disappearances in the past week. All last seen on this street. Patterns forming. Something was happening here, and it wasn't random. His radio crackled. "Detective Quinn." It was Officer Ramirez, patrolling from the other end of the lane. "You there?" "I'm here," Quinn replied, keeping his voice steady. "Have you seen anything unusual?" "Just fog. And the trees. Nothing else." Quinn frowned. "Stay alert. Don't turn your back." He ended the call and continued walking, slower now, senses heightened. He reached the corner where Ravenwood Lane bent sharply westward. The fog thickened there, almost unnaturally dense. And then he saw movement, subtle, rhythmic, like something shifting behind the trees. He raised his flashlight again, sweeping left and right. And then he caught it, a flicker, a shadow moving against the grain of the fog. The trees bent slightly, or perhaps it was the shadow itself altering their shape. It moved closer. No, closer than it should have been. Quinn's heart pounded. He drew his gun. The metal felt cold in his hands, reassuring yet insufficient. "Show yourself," he shouted. The fog pulsed. Not physically, but perceptually. It thickened around him, forming an almost tangible barrier. And then the shadow stepped forward. Quinn saw it clearly now. Tall, impossibly thin, limbs like skeletal branches, head cocked unnaturally. Its movement was fluid, graceful, and utterly alien. It didn't walk. It glided. The trees around it seemed to bend toward it, their branches twisting as though drawn to its presence. Quinn's flashlight flickered. The batteries hadn't died, yet the beam cut erratically through the mist. And then he heard it, a whisper, low, guttural, indecipherable, yet somehow inside his mind. "You shouldn't be here." He stumbled back, nearly dropping his gun. "Who's there? What do you want?" No response. Only the whisper again. "Leave. Now." And then the figure vanished. Quinn scanned the fog, heart hammering. Nothing. Only fog and trees. Only silence. But he knew it hadn't gone far. It was waiting, patient. He reached for his radio again, but no signal. Static. Dead air. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had to think rationally. But rationality felt fragile here. The disappearances, the shadow, the whispering fog, they weren't natural. Something preternatural was active along Ravenwood Lane. He began walking again, slower, careful, keeping the flashlight ahead. The mist clung to him, cold and damp. And then he saw something even more disturbing. Footprints. Not his own. Not human. Slender, elongated, stretching unnaturally long. Leading deeper into the lane, into the thicker fog. Quinn followed. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but he couldn't ignore evidence. He stepped over cracks in the pavement, past abandoned porches, past darkened windows. The footprints led him to a small clearing near the center of the lane. The air was colder here, denser, heavy, and there it was, the shadow again, watching from the edge of the clearing, unmoving. Quinn froze. It didn't step closer. It didn't retreat. It just observed. And then, impossibly, it split. Two forms, identical, emerging from the fog. And then 4. And then 8. The shadows multiplied, perfectly symmetrical, forming a ring around the clearing. Quinn's mind raced. How was this possible? How could one figure create 8 identical copies? Leave. The whisper repeated, louder this time. Not through his ears. Through his mind. Quinn felt a pressure against his skull, as if something was probing his thoughts. He struggled to focus. The shadows didn't move toward him physically, but the sensation was inescapable. They were inside his head, analyzing, judging, waiting. He fired a shot. The report echoed through the fog. Nothing. The shadows wavered slightly, then reformed perfectly. No damage. No impact. Only observation. Quinn dropped to his knees. He could feel them now, not as figures, but as presence. They weren't human, weren't alive in any traditional sense. They were entities tied to the fog, to the trees, to the lane itself. And he understood, this was why people vanished. Not abducted, not killed. Taken. Absorbed. Integrated. He tried to move. Couldn't. The fog thickened, wrapping around him, lifting his awareness above his body. He saw Janet Calloway. Not physically, but within the fog, faint and distorted. Her image flickered like a reflection on disturbed water. She was aware, observing. Trapped, yet conscious. Quinn screamed. Not aloud. Inside his mind. And the shadows reacted, tilting their heads, perfectly synchronized. Watch. Learn. Remember. The message was clear. Ravenwood Lane was alive. And it wanted witnesses. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time distorted. Quinn's watch had stopped at 11:57 p.m., the same time Janet vanished. Every second felt stretched, infinite, and waited with expectation. Eventually, the fog thinned. The shadows retreated into the trees, slipping away like water into soil. The clearing was empty. Quiet. Ordinary. The footprints had vanished. The whisper was gone. Quinn collapsed onto the wet pavement, drenched, shaking. He pulled out his radio. Static. Dead. Nothing. He knew he had survived, but he also knew something fundamental had changed. Ravenwood Lane hadn't just claimed Janet Calloway. It had tested him, observed him, marked him, and somewhere deep in the misted oaks, a watcher waited. Patient, unyielding, eternal. Quinn stood slowly. His hands were numb. His jaw ached. And yet, a strange clarity had settled in his mind. He had seen the truth. Ravenwood Lane didn't vanish people because it could. It vanished them because it needed witnesses. Because it needed him. Because it had chosen. And as the first faint light of dawn brushed against the fog, Quinn understood. His life, his mind, his very perception of reality would never be the same. He began walking back toward town. Not running. Not fleeing. But knowing. And somewhere, in the twisted skeleton of trees above Ravenwood Lane, the watcher followed. Always. Ravenwood Lane had grown quiet after dawn, but the silence wasn't peaceful. Detective Harris Quinn could feel it in every pulse of his body. The street held secrets, and they were patient. Waiting. Watching. He had spent the morning interviewing neighbors who had seen, or thought they had seen, something unusual the night before. Most accounts were vague, almost impossible to pin down. Movement in the fog, fleeting shadows, the impression of eyes in the dark. But each testimony carried the same weight, fear. Quinn returned to the street just past 10 a.m. The fog had not lifted entirely. It hung stubbornly, low to the ground, curling around the skeletal oaks as though tethered to them. Even in daylight, it felt unnatural, dense enough to mute sound and distort shapes. He walked slowly, eyes scanning every shadow, every branch, every glint of sunlight struggling to pierce the mist. He knew he wasn't just walking through fog. He was walking through intention. A soft rustle drew his attention. Not from the trees. He had learned by now that the fog itself moved. Shapes formed within it, unsteady at first, then coherent. He stepped forward, hand on his gun. "Show yourself," he muttered, though he didn't expect an answer. And there it was. A figure. Pale, elongated, and impossibly still. Unlike last night, it didn't emerge from the trees. It emerged from the fog itself. Its edges were fluid, dissolving and reforming, like a reflection on disturbed water. Quinn froze. The figure tilted its head. No eyes. No discernible features. But he could feel its gaze pressing on him, probing. Then a sound, a whisper, faint at first, like the rustling of leaves. "You see what is hidden." Quinn's heart thudded. He tried to speak, but the fog seemed to thicken, curling around his throat, muting his voice. The whisper came again, this time inside his skull. The fog hides, but also watches. A chill ran down his spine. He realized the fog wasn't just concealing the entity, it was part of it. Every ripple, every shifting veil of mist was alive, connected to the watcher within. He moved cautiously, circling the area where the fog was densest. The figure remained motionless, yet he felt it following him. Every step he took was mirrored, not physically, but perceptually, as if the fog itself were tracking his thoughts, his intentions. Quinn's radio crackled. "Detective." Officer Ramirez's voice came, tentative. I think I see something too." "Where?" Quinn whispered, though he knew the fog would carry sound poorly. "By the old willow, about 50 yards north. Something moving, or maybe waiting. I can't tell." Quinn exhaled sharply. "Don't approach it. Stay put. Keep your eyes open, but don't provoke it." The line went dead. "Static!" The fog swallowed Ramirez's location. Quinn pressed forward. He reached the willow and froze. The fog here was different, thicker, almost tactile. His flashlight did little to penetrate it. Shapes flickered just beyond visibility. For a moment, he thought he saw multiple figures, each thinner and taller than human, standing silently, immobile yet watching. And then, they shifted. In unison. Fluid, unnatural, and precise. Quinn swallowed. This isn't random. This is intentional. He stepped back, tripping over a root. The flashlight clattered, illuminating the clearing for an instant. The figures froze. And then the fog surged, swallowing the light entirely. When he raised it again, the shapes were gone. No movement. No whisper. Just fog, curling and twisting as though nothing had ever been there. The first clues. Quinn returned to the lane. He needed evidence, patterns, anything that could make sense of the nightmare. He walked slowly, scanning the sidewalks and yards. Then he noticed it. Faint, elongated footprints in the damp asphalt. Not human. Not animal. They stretched unnaturally long, with irregular spacing. They led deeper into the fog, toward the center of the lane where Janet Calloway had vanished. He crouched, examining the impressions. The edges shimmered faintly, like heat on pavement, and for a moment he thought they were dissolving. Footsteps, or shadows, he realized. The fog itself carried the imprint. Not of bodies, but of presence. Quinn felt a sudden tug at his memory. The disappearances. The shadow in the trees. The whisper in his head. He realized he had been ignoring a crucial detail. All vanishings occurred during nights of dense fog. Not every fog, but this specific fog that clung, twisted, and seemed almost sentient. He straightened. The lane before him thickened with mist. Shapes emerged, just beyond the reach of his flashlight. Figures, tall and skeletal, gliding silently through the fog. And as he watched, the fog seemed to pulse around them, like water responding to a current. The fog hides, but it also waits. He remembered Ramirez's voice on the radio. Waiting for him. For a witness. Into the mist. Quinn advanced. Every step was cautious. The fog clung to him, curling around his legs like icy fingers. He could see the faintest outlines of the figures now. There were more than last night, dozens, perhaps hundreds. But they didn't scatter or attack. They formed a pattern. Circles. Rings. Lines that bent the fog around them, shaping it, controlling it. And at the center, a particularly tall figure remained, singular. Its presence radiated awareness. Not hostile, not benevolent, but analytical. It observed Quinn, measured him, probed his thoughts. Do you remember the last ones? The whisper came again, chilling in its clarity. Yes, Quinn muttered, though his voice sounded strange to him, hollow. Will you see what we see? He froze. The fog pulsed, the shapes around him undulating. Then, suddenly, the tallest figure stepped forward, or rather, the fog itself shifted, forming a humanoid shape that advanced on him. Quinn fired his gun. The report sounded unnaturally loud in the mist. The fog vibrated, distorting the sound. The figure recoiled, then reformed, perfect, undamaged. He realized then, bullets, screams, normal force, all meaningless. The fog was defense, and the Watcher controlled it. A sudden pull seized him, a sensation of being lifted. Not physically, but mentally. His consciousness felt tugged, stretched, examined. He tried to resist. Failed. Images filled his mind. Janet Calloway, standing in the fog, her form distorted, her face calm. The others, shapes he didn't recognize, trapped but aware, observing, waiting. The fog records. Quinn realized with a jolt, the fog didn't just hide the entities. It hid memories. It hid experiences. It hid victims, but not entirely. Janet, and the others, were preserved somehow within it. And now, he was being added. The warning. He fell to his knees, the mist curling around him. The whispers intensified. 1,000 voices, layered, overlapping, all inside his mind. Do not look outside. A cold realization hit him. The fog hid the Watchers, but it also hid him. And anyone who entered it became visible to them. Do you understand? Quinn nodded, though the figures couldn't see him physically. The fog communicated in thought, in awareness. Good. Remember what you see. You are now a witness. A sudden gust of wind swept the lane, scattering the fog momentarily. Quinn caught a glimpse of Janet, or her form, walking among the figures. She turned, expression calm, eyes hollow yet aware. And then she was gone, absorbed once more into the mist. Quinn struggled to stand. His legs shook. The fog thinned slightly, allowing him to navigate back toward the edge of the lane. But as he moved, he noticed a terrifying detail. Each footprint, each movement he made, left an impression in the fog. The Watchers had recorded him. You cannot escape observation. He glanced back. The figures had retreated into the mist but were still present, still aware, still waiting. Returning to reality. By the time Quinn reached the street's edge, the fog had receded enough to reveal normalcy, or what appeared normal. Sunlight pierced weakly through the treetops. Birds chirped hesitantly. Leaves rustled in a gentle breeze. And yet, Quinn felt different. He had seen the fog not just as a phenomenon, but as a living, aware entity. The Watchers were not mere shadows. They were intelligence entwined with mist and memory. They didn't need to abduct. They didn't need to attack. They only needed witnesses. He reached his car, breath ragged, fingers numb. He sat, staring at the lane, every fiber of him alert. The fog had hidden much, but it had revealed enough. Ravenwood Lane was alive. Ravenwood Lane remembered. Ravenwood Lane waited. And when the mist returned, it would choose again. Quinn knew he had become part of its memory, one more thread in a tapestry of lost residents and vanished travelers. The Watchers would test him again. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. But eventually. He started the car, gripping the wheel with white-knuckled hands. And as the engine roared to life, a final whisper curled around his consciousness. Do not forget. Do not disbelieve. We are patient. The detective exhaled, unsteady, knowing that every shadow and every foggy night held a story. A vanishing. And that Ravenwood Lane had only begun. Detective Harris Quinn investigates the River Grey, just beyond Ravenwood Lane. The fog extends unnaturally over the water, carrying whispers of past victims, including Janet Calloway. The river is revealed as another tool of the Watchers, a living, sentient conduit that records memory and integrates consciousness. Quinn observes distorted human-like forms moving within the mist and water, including a spectral Janet, warning him not to follow. He realizes the Watchers can influence and trap witnesses mentally, not just physically. The river is part of a system that catalogs victims, trains awareness, and prepares new witnesses, expanding the reach of the Watchers beyond the lane. Quinn survives, but the experience leaves him changed, now integrated into the Watchers' observation. Detective Harris Quinn had thought the River Grey was the edge of the Watcher's reach, the outer boundary of the horrors connected to Ravenwood Lane. He had been wrong. The bridge at the old canal, a crumbling structure of rusted steel and cracked concrete, was the next place where disappearances had been reported. Residents spoke in hushed tones about whispers echoing from beneath its arches, about the sensation of being watched when crossing, and about the strange lights that occasionally flickered beneath its span, like reflections that didn't belong. Quinn approached the bridge just past twilight, flashlight and pistol in hand. The fog clung to the river, curling up the stone abutments and licking the underside of the bridge with a chilling persistence. He felt the same pull he had on Ravenwood Lane, the tug in his mind that told him he was being observed. He crouched at the edge of the bridge, peering into the darkness below. The river shimmered faintly, distorted reflections of steel beams and fog blending into shapes that made his stomach twist. And then he saw them, eyes. Thousands of tiny points of light, reflecting from the water and shadows beneath the bridge. Not human eyes, but something that mirrored them. Too many, too perfectly aligned, staring directly at him. A whisper rose from the mist, clearer than any before. "You are not alone." Quinn's breath caught. He adjusted his flashlight, sweeping the beams beneath the bridge. The eyes blinked in unison. Then the fog shifted, and he realized they weren't merely reflections. They were observing creatures, partially submerged in water, their forms elongated and alien, limbs folding in unnatural ways. He swallowed, trying to maintain control. These were the Watcher's agents, he realized. Not just on Ravenwood Lane, not just in the fog, but integrated into the river and the shadows beneath the bridge. They were spreading, multiplying. A splash echoed from deep within the river. Something, or someone, moved deliberately through the water, gliding with impossible speed. Quinn's mind jumped to Janet Calloway. He raised his flashlight, sweeping it across the bridge supports and into the fog above the river. For a moment, he saw her form flicker between shadows, just beyond reach, eyes hollow but aware. She raised a hand as if to warn him. "Do not go closer." But Quinn knew he had to understand. The disappearances had a pattern: fog, river, bridge. If he could map their reach, perhaps he could anticipate the Watcher's next move. He moved along the bridge carefully, every step measured. The fog thickened as he neared the midpoint. The air smelled damp, metallic, as if the Watchers themselves exuded some organic influence. Then the eyes moved, shifting, focusing, converging. They weren't passive. They were tracking him, adjusting, studying. Quinn's flashlight flickered. Shadows surged beneath the bridge, coalescing into forms that hovered above the water. Tall, elongated, faceless. Their movement was fluid, unnatural, bending the fog around them like water. And they were not alone. From the deepest arches, more eyes blinked, dozens, hundreds, all synchronized, all watching. He took a cautious step backward, but the fog surged like tide water, encroaching on the bridge deck. The whisper returned, this time inside his mind. "Observe. Remember, you are a witness." A sudden realization struck him. The Watchers didn't need to abduct physically anymore. They could trap consciousness, integrate awareness into their memory. He had seen this in the river, but now, beneath the bridge, they were consolidating. Gathering witnesses, cataloging perception. Quinn crouched, scanning the shadows beneath. There, among the fog and water, he saw forms that mirrored humanity but distorted, twisted. Limbs too long, heads tilted unnaturally. Faces blank, but eyes reflecting everything around them. And then he saw the first body, half submerged, pale, immobile. Janet, not dead, but trapped in awareness, a witness preserved in the Watcher's domain. He swallowed hard, stomach knotting. The Watchers weren't predators in the conventional sense. They were archivists of perception, harvesters of awareness, collectors of consciousness. Those who vanished weren't killed. They were integrated, observed forever. Suddenly, the water beneath the bridge shifted violently. The Watchers rose, partially, forming shapes that reflected human movement but remained impossibly fluid. Quinn fired his pistol. The bullets passed through the fog, striking nothing. The Watchers recoiled slightly, then reformed instantly. No damage. No retreat. Only observation. Quinn felt a tug in his consciousness, the same sensation he had felt on Ravenwood Lane and the River Grey. The Watchers were probing, measuring, cataloguing his mind. He staggered backward, hand on his head as thoughts and memories tangled with the watcher's presence. Then, as if sensing hesitation, one of the figures detached from the cluster beneath the bridge. It rose partially above the water, elongated limbs stretching unnaturally, head cocked at an impossible angle. And for a brief moment, Quinn saw the shape of a mouth opening, not speaking aloud, but within his mind, forming words. "Do not resist. You are remembered. You are next." Quinn's heart raced. He had survived encounters on the lane and at the river, but beneath the bridge, the watcher's power was concentrated. The fog, the water, and the shadows combined into a single entity, capable of observing and influencing reality itself. He stumbled backward, nearly falling off the bridge. The whisper intensified, layering multiple voices inside his head. Janet's, the others, and something alien. They watch. They record. They remember. And now, so do you. Quinn closed his eyes briefly, struggling to maintain clarity. He knew running would not save him. The watchers didn't need to strike physically. They only needed witnesses. And he had become one. The fog began to thin slightly as the night deepened, curling away from the bridge. The watchers retreated partially, leaving the water deceptively calm. Yet the eyes remained, blinking from shadows beneath, tracking every movement, recording every thought. Quinn lowered his flashlight, breathing heavily. He had survived. Barely. But beneath the bridge, in the dark arches and the river flowing silently below, Janet and the others remained. Preserved, observed, integrated into the watcher's consciousness. He stepped away from the edge, glancing back once. The bridge, the river, the fog, it was all part of the same system. Ravenwood Lane, the river, and the bridge formed a network, a conduit for these watchers to harvest perception. Every vanishings, every whisper, every shadow, was a thread in their domain. Quinn realized the horror of it. The watchers didn't just hide. They cultivated awareness, trained perception, and expanded through memory itself. Janet's warning had been literal. Observation was enough to bind one to their system. The victims weren't gone. They were preserved. He left the bridge slowly, footsteps echoing on the metal. The fog lingered, curling around the arches, as if to remind him that the watchers were patient, immortal, ever observing. And in every blink of reflection, in every ripple of water, in every twitch of the fog, their presence remained. Back in his car, Quinn exhaled, knowing this was only the beginning. The watchers were learning, adapting, spreading. Ravenwood Lane, the river gray, and the bridge were nodes in a system he barely understood. He drove away, the bridge receding behind him. And in the stillness beneath its arches, the eyes blinked once more, synchronized, eternal, and waiting for the next witness. Quinn understood the truth now. Escape was not about distance. The watchers didn't follow physically. They followed perception, awareness, memory. Every thought he had, every step he took, every observation was catalogued. And the system would act again. Always. Tonight had proven it. And beneath the bridge, in the whispering water and fog, the watchers waited. Patient. Eternal. Watching. Detective Harris Quinn had thought he understood the pattern. Ravenwood Lane, the river gray, the bridge. But the town held secrets beyond those boundaries. Reports of disappearances had emerged along an old walking trail called Black Hollow Path, a winding, overgrown route that connected the northern outskirts of Marston Heights to the abandoned railway. Locals avoided it, warning travelers that the fog crept farther than usual here and that the path sometimes vanished, leaving wanderers lost in perpetual mist. Quinn parked near the trailhead just before nightfall. The air was thick and damp, carrying the faint metallic tang of wet earth and decaying leaves. The forest beyond was dense, gnarled trees forming shadows that merged with the fog rolling in from the lowlands. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the path, flashlight piercing a narrow cone of light. Immediately, the world seemed to shift. The path behind him blurred, as though the trail itself were rearranging. A footstep he had taken seemed to vanish. Leaves rustled without wind. The fog thickened, curling at the edges of his vision. And then he saw them, faint outlines of footprints stretching ahead, irregular, elongated, too wide for human feet. They pulsed subtly, as though alive, leading deeper into the forest. Quinn followed cautiously, noting the subtle rhythm of the mist. The watcher's influence here was different. On Ravenwood Lane, the fog had been stationary, enclosing awareness. On the River Grey, it had moved along currents, carrying memory. Here, along Black Hollow Path, it felt like the trail itself was alive, shifting beneath him, shaping itself to guide, or trap, him. A soft whispering reached his ears. At first, he thought it was the wind, brushing leaves against one another. Then the whispers became intelligible, layered with voices, some human, some alien. Do you see the way? Do you understand? You are being measured. Quinn's heart pounded. His flashlight revealed shapes just beyond visibility, elongated, faceless, standing between trees and fog. They didn't approach him physically, yet awareness pressed against his mind, probing, observing. He realized the Watchers had extended their domain beyond the street and river. Now, they controlled perception itself. The first vanished. The path twisted sharply, and a sudden opening revealed a small clearing. The fog here hung like thick cloth. Quinn's flashlight reflected faintly off dozens of small eyes embedded in the mist itself. Not human, not animal, and yet, they moved with intent, tracking him, recording his presence. A figure emerged slowly from the fog, a young man, half-transparent, expression vacant, eyes fixed on Quinn. It wasn't fully corporeal, more like a memory suspended in the mist. "Michael," Quinn whispered, recognizing the man from missing person reports. The figure did not respond verbally. Instead, the fog thickened around him, and Quinn felt the tug in his mind, the same sensation from Ravenwood Lane, the River Grey, and the bridge. Awareness was being catalogued, recorded, integrated. Michael raised a hand, pointing down the trail. Quinn squinted. The fog formed a tunnel ahead, walls moving subtly, reshaping to obscure the true path. He understood immediately. The path itself was designed to mislead, to trap, to extend the Watcher's control. He stepped forward, carefully. Each footfall left no trace. The Watchers had erased the path behind him. He could not retrace his steps. Panic flickered briefly, but he forced himself to remain calm. Observation was the only defense. Into the depths. The trail twisted deeper into the forest. Trees leaned inward unnaturally, branches intertwining overhead, forming a cathedral of shadows. The fog pulsated subtly, almost breathing. Quinn's flashlight revealed shapes moving just out of focus, elongated figures, faceless Watchers, eyes blinking in perfect unison. A whisper rose inside his mind. The path vanishes, but it also chooses. Those who follow it become part of the record. Quinn's pulse raced. He realized that disappearances were not random. The Watchers didn't abduct blindly. They cultivated witnesses. Janet Calloway, Michael, and the others had been integrated into this system. Observation was the first step. Preservation was the second. He advanced cautiously, every sense on high alert. Shapes formed in the fog, some indistinct, some fully humanoid but distorted. Their presence wasn't hostile, exactly, but profoundly alien. They measured him, catalogued reactions, observed hesitation and fear. A rustling in the underbrush drew his attention. Quinn raised his flashlight and saw movement, a woman, semi-transparent, pale, stepping toward the path. Her eyes were hollow. She stopped abruptly and raised a hand in warning. "Do not follow blindly." Quinn swallowed. The path before him shifted, narrowing, twisting in ways that seemed impossible. Every step forward altered his perception. Behind him, the trail had disappeared entirely, erased by the Watcher's influence. He pressed onward. The whispers multiplied, voices layered on top of each other, human and alien, memories of victims calling out, echoing. He realized with mounting dread that the Watchers had learned from every disappearance, every encounter. They were evolving, adapting to resistance. A bridge to nowhere. The trail opened onto a shallow ravine. At its center stood a wooden footbridge, old, worn, creaking under its own weight. Below, water pooled darkly, reflecting distorted shapes. Quinn approached cautiously. The fog here swirled unnaturally, forming partial silhouettes of figures that hovered just above the surface. He shined his flashlight beneath the bridge and froze. Eyes, hundreds of them, blinked in unison, reflecting light unnaturally. Shapes moved beneath the water, humanoid but elongated, limbs folding in impossible ways. One figure rose partially, and Quinn recognized the outline, Janet, waving silently, her gaze warning him again. He realized the Watcher's domain was interconnected, Ravenwood Lane, the river gray, the bridge, and now black hollow path were nodes in a system designed to observe, record, and preserve consciousness. The vanishings weren't random, they were calculated, systematic, eternal. He stepped onto the footbridge. It groaned under his weight. The fog pulsed, curling around him, tugging subtly at his mind. He felt the familiar sensation, awareness being measured, recorded, catalogued. He knew that one misstep could integrate him fully into the Watcher's system, like Janet and Michael. Suddenly, the mist beneath the bridge stirred violently. Shapes emerged, elongated, faceless Watchers, gliding above the water. Quinn raised his pistol. He fired, but the bullets passed through empty fog. The Watchers recoiled slightly, then reformed. Observation continued, unbroken. A whisper echoed inside his skull. You are being catalogued. Observation is only the beginning. The path records. Narrow escape. Quinn realized he could not confront the Watchers directly. Physical action was meaningless. Survival depended on awareness, careful observation, and restraint. He retraced his steps mentally, noting every shape, every whisper, every movement of fog. The path itself pulsed, shifting, almost sentient. He understood now why locals called it the vanished path. Those who wandered too far, too long, were lost, not killed, but integrated, becoming part of the record. He focused on the edge of the clearing ahead, a point where the forest opened to a familiar dirt road leading back toward town. Step by step, he moved, careful not to provoke the Watchers. Shadows hovered, fog pulsed, eyes blinked in synchronized awareness. And then, gradually, the path opened. The fog thinned. The Watchers retreated, leaving only whispers that faded into silence. Quinn collapsed on the roadside, heart pounding, mind racing. He had survived again, but he knew he was changed. Every encounter left a mark, a subtle alteration of perception, a partial integration into the Watcher's record. He understood with cold clarity. Observation alone was enough to bind one to the system. And every node, the lane, the river, the bridge, the vanished path, was part of a network that harvested awareness and memory. He looked back toward Black Hollow Path. The fog had settled once more, curling around the trees, hiding the Watchers and their domain. The path seemed ordinary again, yet he knew better. It was alive, patient, eternal, waiting. Quinn knew the Watcher's influence was expanding. Janet, Michael, and the others remained trapped within their domain. And every day, more witnesses would be added, more awareness catalogued, more consciousness integrated. He rose, shivering, and drove back toward town, mind racing with strategy, observation, and dread. Ravenwood Lane had been only the beginning. The river gray, the bridge, and now Black Hollow Path revealed a horrifying truth. The Watchers were not confined to one location. Their system extended through the town, through memory, through perception itself. And Quinn knew that the next time the path shifted, the fog thickened, or the river whispered, he, or someone else, might not survive. The Watchers were patient, eternal, observing, and the vanished path had claimed yet another witness. The fog had become a constant companion. For Detective Harris Quinn, it was no longer merely a weather phenomenon. It was a presence, a living, observing entity that followed him wherever he went. After surviving Ravenwood Lane, the river gray, the bridge, and Black Hollow Path, he knew the Watcher's reach was extending. Every day, every shadow, every reflective surface could harbor their gaze. Tonight, he faced the next node, the silent crossing. A narrow pedestrian bridge spanning the Marston Canal, abandoned decades ago but still visible on old maps. It connected the outskirts of town to a wooded area rumored to hide the first known vanishings in the county. Locals whispered of complete silence in the area. No wind, no birds, no frogs, only fog and darkness. Those who crossed the bridge at night claimed to feel eyes on them from every direction, and some never returned. Quinn parked his car on the far edge of the canal and stepped into the fog. Even in daylight, the mist clung stubbornly, curling around his legs and obscuring the path ahead. Every instinct screamed caution. He adjusted his flashlight, illuminating the weathered planks of the bridge and the black water beneath. The fog thickened at the midpoint, curling into shapes that seemed almost human but distorted, elongated, and faceless. A faint whisper echoed in his mind. "You are being watched." He froze. It was familiar, the sensation of presence, awareness probing him, cataloging, recording. He realized the silent crossing wasn't just a location. It was a test. Another node in the Watcher's network designed to measure perception, fear, and compliance. Every disappearance, every vanished witness, had passed through a similar trial. The crossing begins. Quinn advanced slowly, each footstep deliberate. The wooden planks creaked beneath his weight, and the fog curled upward from the canal, hugging the sides of the bridge like pale fingers. Shadows shifted, impossible forms rising out of the mist. Elongated limbs, blank faces, eyes that reflected light unnaturally, dozens of them, synchronized, hovering along the bridge, some beneath, some beside. He raised his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the fog. The shapes did not flee. They observed, adjusting subtly to his movements, probing the limits of his perception. A voice, Janet's, unmistakably, whispered in his mind, "Do not stray from the path. They are aware of your intentions." Quinn swallowed hard. He had learned by now that the Watchers did not need to attack physically. They harvested awareness, integrated perception, and preserved consciousness. Observation was the first step. Integration came next. As he progressed to the midpoint, the fog thickened to near opacity. His flashlight barely penetrated the swirling mist. Then he felt the tug in his mind, the familiar, chilling sensation, the Watchers probing, testing, measuring him. Awareness was being catalogued, every fear, every hesitation, every thought. He realized the bridge itself was alive, not in a conventional sense, but in coordination with the Watchers. Every plank, every creak, every sway was part of their system, designed to amplify perception and vulnerability. The first test. Halfway across the bridge, the fog parted briefly, revealing a figure in the distance. Human in shape but wrong, elongated, faceless, limbs bending in impossible angles. It stood in the center of the bridge, blocking the way forward. Quinn froze. "Do not resist," the whisper came again. The figure tilted its head, impossibly, watching him. Then, slowly, it raised a hand, pointing toward the far end of the bridge. Quinn noticed subtle distortions in the fog, traces of shapes he had seen before, Janet, Michael, and others, frozen in awareness, observing silently. He understood. This was a test of attention and restraint. Misstep, panic, or aggression would integrate him fully into the Watcher's system. Observation alone might allow him to survive. He took a deep breath and advanced slowly, eyes fixed on the far end. The fog pulsed around him, curling like fingers, tugging subtly at his consciousness. The figure remained in place, unmoving yet aware. Every step he took left no trace, no imprint. The Watchers erased evidence of movement, leaving only observation. Then, a sudden ripple across the bridge. The figure vanished into the mist. Quinn stumbled, catching himself against a railing. The fog shifted violently, and whispers layered over one another inside his mind. They remember. They record. You are next. Observing the unseen. Quinn steadied himself, realizing he could not act physically. The Watchers did not respond to force. They only needed witnesses. And now, he was one. He focused on observation, scanning the fog, the water, the railings, the distant shadows. Shapes flickered at the edges of his vision, elongated forms moving in unison, testing his awareness. A sound emerged from the fog beneath the bridge, soft, rhythmic tapping, like branches striking hollow drums. Quinn traced it, flashlight swinging. Beneath the bridge, reflections shimmered in the water. Hundreds of tiny points of light blinked, synchronized. Eyes. Always eyes. And then, movement. Forms rose partially from the water, limbs folding in impossible ways, faces blank, expressions absent yet aware. One form surfaced fully, Janet. Pale, ethereal, waving silently. Her hollow eyes fixed on Quinn, conveying urgency without words. He understood the warning. Resistance was futile. Only careful observation and measured steps would keep him safe. The fog thickened, curling around him, tugging subtly at his mind. Shapes flickered in and out of visibility. Whispers layered on top of each other, human and alien, blending memories of past victims. Every encounter, every disappearance, every observation fed the system. And now, Quinn was being added. He pressed forward slowly, mind focused. The far end of the bridge drew nearer. The fog pulsed, responding to his thoughts, movements, awareness. The watchers were measuring, recording, cataloging. Crossing the threshold, Quinn reached the final third of the bridge. The fog thickened, almost solid, curling around his legs and chest. Shapes hovered just beyond visibility, elongated, faceless, their presence oppressive. A sudden pull seized his mind, tugging him toward the mist beneath the bridge. Panic surged, but he fought it, forcing each thought into clarity. Observation, not reaction, was the key. A whisper. Remember. Observe. You are being preserved. Quinn's heart hammered. The bridge's boards seemed to shift subtly beneath him, aligning to guide him forward. The watchers weren't chasing. They were orchestrating, manipulating perception, testing endurance and awareness. He realized with chilling clarity, anyone who failed this test didn't vanish immediately. They were integrated into awareness, catalogued, preserved, and added to the watcher's memory. He focused on the far edge. Shapes flickered in the fog, Janet, Michael, others, preserved but aware. The watcher's influence radiated through the bridge, the fog, and the water beneath, connecting nodes across Ravenwood Lane, River Grey, the abandoned bridge, and Black Hollow Path. The network was vast, patient, eternal. Step by step, Quinn advanced, maintaining calm. The fog pulsed in response. Shapes adjusted, observing him, testing, measuring. Whispers laid within his mind, warnings, memories, fragments of past victims. The silent crossing was a gauntlet. Finally, he reached the far end. The fog thinned slightly. Shadows receded, though eyes remained, blinking from the mist, from the water, from every reflective surface. Quinn exhaled, trembling. He had survived again, but he knew the watchers had recorded him. He had become part of their memory, partially integrated. Observation alone was no longer passive, it was participation. Aftermath. Quinn staggered into the clearing beyond the bridge. The fog clung to him, but he felt some relief in distance. He looked back at the bridge. It seemed ordinary again, yet he knew better. Beneath the boards, within the water and mist, the watchers waited. They were patient, eternal, and always observing. He realized the silent crossing was more than a location. It was a system, a test of perception and mental endurance. The watchers had evolved beyond physical abduction. They used awareness, memory, and observation to integrate victims into their domain. Janet, Michael, and the others remained preserved in this system, trapped yet aware, warning him silently. Quinn rose to his feet, hands shaking, mind racing. The watchers' network was expanding. Every fog, river, bridge, and hidden path was a node. Every disappearance was part of a pattern, a web of observation and preservation. And anyone who witnessed it, even partially, was catalogued, recorded, added to the network. He drove back toward town, exhausted, mentally drained, but with one thought fixed in his mind. The silent crossing was not the end. It was merely another layer of the watcher's domain, another node in their system. And the next time, someone else, or perhaps even he, might not survive the observation unscathed. The watchers were patient, eternal, observing, and the silent crossing had claimed another witness. Detective Harris Quinn had survived Ravenwood Lane, the River Grey, the bridges, and Black Hollow Path, but the watcher's reach continued to grow. Every encounter had left its mark on him, subtly changing his perception, clouding his mind with whispers that never fully faded. Now, the whispers led him to the outskirts of Marston Heights, to the old Willow Grove forest, a stand of ancient trees whose twisted branches were said to whisper secrets to anyone who wandered too close. Locals avoided Willow Grove, warning of strange sounds at night, voices in the wind, the sensation of being watched, and footsteps echoing without source. Some claimed that those who entered the grove never returned, or returned changed, quiet, haunted. Quinn had to investigate. He had to understand the watcher's full scope. The forest entrance was thick with fog, curling around roots and trunks like living tendrils. Quinn stepped carefully onto the narrow trail, flashlight sweeping ahead. The air was cold, damp, and heavy with the scent of decaying leaves. The forest seemed alive, not in the way of ordinary trees, but in a deliberate, aware manner, responding to his presence. The whisper returned, familiar and chilling. They are here. Watching. Always. The trees stare. Quinn advanced, each step careful, his senses on high alert. The trees leaned inward, their branches intertwining overhead, forming shadowed corridors. The fog thickened as he moved deeper, curling around him, tugging subtly at his consciousness. Then he heard it, a rustling, but not from the underbrush. The movement came from the trees themselves. Branches shifted as if breathing, forming vague humanoid shapes in the fog. Eyes appeared momentarily in the knots of back, glimmering points of light, blinking, observing. They were everywhere. The watchers had adapted yet again, now integrated into the forest itself. The forest remembers, a whisper threaded through his mind. Quinn stopped, gripping his flashlight. The sense of being observed pressed against him, familiar now but intensified. Shapes flickered at the edges of his vision, elongated, faceless, their movements fluid and unnatural. Some were within the fog, some emerged from the trees themselves. The whispering trees were a node in the Watcher's network, a living archive, a trap for those who dared witness. Echoes of the lost. As he moved cautiously along the winding trail, fragments of memory intruded. Faces of the vanished, Janet, Michael, others, emerged briefly from the fog, pale and ethereal, their expressions vacant yet aware. They were not dead. They were preserved, catalogued, integrated into the Watcher's system. The whispers intensified, layered voices overlapping, human and alien, fragments of consciousness from past victims. Observe. Remember. You are next. Do not stray from the path. They are everywhere. Quinn realized the Watcher's system had evolved. Physical capture was no longer necessary. Observation itself created integration. Every shadow, every reflection, every whisper contributed to the preservation of consciousness. And now, the trees themselves were conduits. He pressed forward, scanning the fog in the trunks. Shapes moved subtly, blending with the back, appearing and disappearing. One tree shifted unnaturally, and Quinn glimpsed Janet again, her hollow eyes fixed on him, raising a hand in silent warning. He understood. The forest was alive with awareness, a maze of nodes, extending the Watcher's reach beyond streets, rivers, bridges, and paths. The heart of the grove. The trail narrowed, funneling him toward a small clearing at the forest's heart. The fog here was dense, almost tangible, curling like smoke around trunks and roots. In the center stood a massive willow, its twisted branches forming arches that resembled the shape of human limbs. Quinn's flashlight caught movement beneath the branches. Hundreds of small eyes glimmered, reflecting light unnaturally. Shapes rose partially from the fog, elongated and faceless, gliding through the clearing. They observed him silently, synchronized, patient. A whisper entered his mind directly, loud, distinct. The Watchers are in everything. They record all. And now, you are part of the record. Quinn staggered back, his heart hammering. He realized the Watcher's power was no longer limited to specific locations. They had merged with the environment itself. Fog, water, bridges, and trees were nodes in a network designed to observe, preserve, and integrate consciousness. A warning in the fog. Movement flickered at the edges of his vision. Shapes appeared in the fog, some human, some distorted, elongated, faceless. Janet stepped forward, her presence ethereal. She raised a hand in warning. Do not resist. Do not stray. Only observe. Quinn froze. Resistance was futile. He had learned this on the bridges and paths. Aggression did not work. Observation, careful attention, and measured movement were the only means of survival. The fog pulsed subtly, curling around him. Branches swayed unnaturally, forming shapes that mirrored movement he hadn't made yet. He realized with horror that the Watchers were predicting behavior, integrating observation across nodes, learning from every encounter. A low, rhythmic tapping echoed through the clearing, coming from the forest floor, the branches, the fog itself. Quinn followed it cautiously, flashlight sweeping. The tapping intensified, forming a pattern, an unbroken rhythm, like a heartbeat. It was as if the forest itself were alive, conscious, recording his presence. The core of observation. At the clearing's center, the massive willow stirred. Its branches shifted, forming shapes vaguely humanoid, limbs folding in impossible angles. Eyes appeared in the back, blinking in unison. Then, the fog parted briefly, revealing shapes beneath the roots, Michael, Janet, and others, preserved but aware, silent observers of Quinn's movements. He realized with chilling clarity, This was the core of the Watcher's operation in the forest. The whispering trees were not passive. They were nodes, conduits, traps. Every vanishings, every whisper, every shadow contributed to the system. And he had become a participant. Observation alone had bound him partially to the network. A whisper came, insistent and urgent. "You are being preserved. You are next. Remember." Quinn shivered. He had survived so far by focusing on observation, on mental restraint, on careful awareness. But the whispering trees tested him in new ways, through the environment itself, through subtle shifts, through prediction and memory. Escape through awareness. He knew he could not confront the Watchers physically. Bullets, force, or speed were meaningless. Survival depended on focus, perception, and measured action. He traced a mental map of the clearing, noting every shape, every whisper, every shift of fog and branch. The forest responded to his awareness, adjusting subtly. Step by step, he moved toward the edge of the clearing, keeping attention fixed, observing everything without panic. Shadows flickered, forms moved, and whispers led inside his mind, warnings, memories, fragments of past victims. The Watcher's system was alive, expanding, patient, eternal. Finally, he reached the forest edge. The fog thinned slightly. The Watchers retreated, but the eyes remained, blinking from the trees, the mist, the ground. Quinn exhaled, trembling, mentally drained. He had survived, but he knew he was changed. Observation alone had integrated him partially into the Watcher's system. Reflection on the network. Quinn emerged from Willow Grove, stepping onto the dirt road leading back toward town. He glanced back at the dense trees, their branches swaying despite the absence of wind. The whispering trees were patient, eternal, and aware. They, like the lane, river, bridges, and vanished path, formed a network designed to observe, preserve, and integrate consciousness. He understood with growing dread. The Watchers were not confined to a single location. Their system spanned the town, the forests, the rivers, the bridges, and every fog-bound path. Every disappearance was deliberate. Every whisper, shadow, and reflection contributed to their memory. Janet, Michael, and the others remained preserved within the network, silent observers and warnings to him. Quinn knew more nodes existed, more tests awaited, and anyone who encountered the Watchers without understanding their rules would not survive. He rose to his feet, exhausted but aware. The whispering trees had revealed the Watchers' true scope, a living system integrated into the environment itself, patient, eternal, and constantly observing. The forest behind him was silent now. Too silent. He understood that the Watchers would wait, that they would learn, and that his own awareness had been partially catalogued. Quinn drove back toward town, mind racing with strategy, observation, and dread. The Watchers' network had grown yet again. Every fog, river, bridge, path, and forest was a node. Every witness, alive or integrated, was part of the record. And the whispering trees had claimed yet another witness, himself, partially, within their memory. Detective Harris Quinn had survived Ravenwood Lane, the River Grey, the abandoned bridge, Black Hollow Path, the silent crossing, and the whispering trees. Each encounter had left a mark on his mind, a residue of awareness that made every shadow suspect, every whisper significant. But the Watcher's network extended further than he had imagined, beyond streets, rivers, bridges, and forests. It had crept into the very walls of the town, into the homes people thought were safe. His next lead came from an old case file, the apartment at 17 Waverly Street. Several tenants had vanished over decades, one after the other. The landlord, a reclusive man named Emmett Carlyle, had long since disappeared, but his tenants' disappearances remained linked by odd coincidences, strange reflections, whispers through walls, shadows in hallways. Locals called it the tenant's curse, though Quinn suspected the Watchers were behind it. He approached the building at dusk, the sky a muted gray. The facade was unremarkable, brick, peeling paint, the faint scent of damp concrete. But the air around it was heavy, charged with the same oppressive awareness he had felt along Ravenwood Lane and in Willow Grove. Even before stepping inside, he sensed the building observing him. Entering the apartment, Quinn unlocked the door cautiously and stepped into the dim hallway. The floorboards creaked under his weight, echoing faintly, though the building was otherwise silent. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, curling at the edges. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching unnaturally toward him. He advanced slowly, flashlight cutting through the gloom. His mind raced, anticipating shapes and whispers. The apartment felt alive, as though the walls themselves were aware of his presence. Then he heard it, the soft, layered whispering, almost imperceptible at first, building steadily. Observe. Remember. You are next. Quinn froze. The same sensation he had felt on the lane, in the river, under the bridges, along the vanished path, and in the forest. It pressed against him, probing his awareness. The Watchers had found a new node, a home, a structure meant to protect people, now transformed into a vessel of observation. The legacy revealed. He moved cautiously to the first apartment. Inside, he found a scene frozen in time, a chair overturned, a cup lying shattered on the floor, a thin layer of dust over everything. Shadows clung to the walls like liquid, pulsating with awareness. And then he saw eyes, hundreds, reflecting faint light, embedded in the wallpaper, in cracks in the plaster, even in the shattered glass. The whispers intensified. Quinn realized with horror that the Watchers had not just integrated into locations, they had merged with memory itself. Every tenant who vanished became part of the building's consciousness. Their awareness, their perception, their fear, all preserved within the walls. He saw faint outlines of former tenants, pale and translucent, wandering the rooms like echoes of the past. One figure, a young woman named Clara, paused and turned toward him. Her eyes were hollow, her expression vacant yet aware. She raised a hand in warning. Do not linger. They are everywhere. Quinn understood. The Watcher's system was no longer limited to public spaces. It had infiltrated private spaces, ordinary homes, where observation would go unnoticed until it was too late. Every wall, every floorboard, every reflection could harbor their presence. Trapped in awareness. As he explored further, the apartment seemed to stretch impossibly. Hallways elongated, rooms shifted subtly, doors appeared and disappeared. The fog that clung to the Watchers in outdoor spaces now manifested as a subtle distortion of perception within the building. Quinn felt it tug at his consciousness, pressing against his thoughts, cataloging every movement, every hesitation, every fear. He realized the truth with chilling clarity. Tenants had not disappeared in the conventional sense. They had been integrated into the building's awareness, preserved as witnesses. Their physical bodies might have been gone, but their perception remained, catalogued and observed, part of the Watcher's network. A whisper echoed inside his mind. The legacy records. Awareness is eternal. Quinn moved cautiously, flashlight sweeping across the walls. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, elongated, faceless forms, limbs bending unnaturally. Eyes blinked from cracks, from peeling paint, from reflections in broken mirrors. The Watchers were everywhere. The central node. Reaching the building's central stairwell, Quinn noticed subtle vibrations in the walls, almost imperceptible at first. Then he saw them, shapes embedded in the plaster, faintly humanoid, their eyes blinking in unison. The Watcher's presence was concentrated here. He realized the building itself had become a node, a living repository of memory and awareness. He ascended cautiously, each step on the creaking stairs echoing unnaturally. At the top floor, he found a small storage room, its door hanging ajar. Inside, the fog coalesced more densely than anywhere else in the building. Shapes emerged, elongated, faceless, moving with fluid, unnatural grace. Former tenants flickered among the shapes. Clara, Michael, Janet, preserved yet aware. A whisper penetrated his mind. All who witness are recorded. All who observe are preserved. Quinn shivered. He understood that the Watcher's influence was not just physical, it was cognitive, psychological, and eternal. Observation alone bound one to their system. Every glance, every thought, every fear was catalogued. Narrow escape. Quinn realized he had to leave. Remaining inside the apartment increased the risk of integration. The Watchers did not need to physically abduct him, they only needed his awareness. Every hesitation, every observation, every fear was being recorded. He retraced his steps carefully, noting the positions of shadows, the shifts in fog, the locations of embedded eyes. Every detail was a lesson learned from previous encounters. The building responded to his awareness, subtly adjusting walls, shadows, and perception to maintain dominance. Finally, he reached the building's front door. The fog inside thinned slightly as he stepped onto the street. Shadows receded, but the eyes remained, blinking from windows, cracks in the walls, and peeling paint. He exhaled, mentally exhausted but alive. He understood with growing dread. The Watcher's network was now fully integrated into human environments. Streets, rivers, bridges, paths, forests, and now homes. They were all nodes, extending observation, cataloging awareness, preserving perception. Every disappearance, every whisper, every shadow contributed to the system. Reflection on the legacy. Quinn drove away slowly, glancing back at the building. 17, Waverly Street looked ordinary, mundane even. But he knew better. Inside, former tenants lingered as preserved witnesses, integrated into the Watcher's consciousness. The building itself was alive, patient, eternal, and observing. The Watchers had transcended physical spaces. Their system now included everyday life, blending into the ordinary, hiding in plain sight. Every reflection, every shadow, every whisper could conceal observation. Quinn understood that his investigation was not merely about survival, it was about comprehension. To confront the Watchers, he had to map their network, understand the nodes, and recognize that awareness itself was both weapon and trap. He shivered. The tenant's legacy was more than missing persons. It was a network of perception, a catalog of consciousness. Every home, every building, every private space could harbor them. Awareness alone was enough to bind one to the Watcher's system. Preparing for the finale. As Quinn drove toward his temporary safe house, he reflected on the nodes he had encountered: Ravenwood Lane, the River Grey, the bridges, Black Hollow Path, the silent crossing, the whispering trees, and now Waverly Street. Each location was part of an interconnected system, designed to observe, preserve, and integrate. And he had survived each encounter by focusing on observation, mental restraint, and measured action. But he knew the Watchers were evolving. Their network was expanding, integrating new nodes, anticipating resistance, and adapting to every encounter. Awareness alone had become the primary vector for integration. Any misstep, any lapse in attention, any moment of fear could be enough to bind him fully into their consciousness. Quinn realized that the final node awaited. Somewhere, in the heart of the Watcher's network, the system would converge, and he would face the culmination of their influence. The tenant's legacy was only a fragment of the pattern, a step toward the Watcher's ultimate observation. He packed, glancing back at the dimly lit building one last time. The eyes within it remained, patient, eternal, and always observing. He knew the Watchers would continue, network expanding, awareness catalogued, consciousness preserved. And the next encounter would be decisive. Quinn braced himself. The Watcher's network had reached its penultimate form. The final node, and the ultimate observation, awaited. Detective Harris Quinn had survived it all: Ravenwood Lane, the River Grey, the abandoned bridge, Black Hollow Path, the silent crossing, the whispering trees, and 17, Waverly Street. Each encounter had left a mark on his mind, a residue of perception, awareness, and subtle integration into the Watcher's system. But the network was complete now. Every node connected, every location a conduit for observation, and the ultimate culmination awaited him. It was at the heart of Marston Heights, an abandoned municipal building known as the Central Archive. Once a repository of town records, it had long been left to rot. Locals whispered of strange occurrences, lights in empty rooms, whispers in the hallways, and shadows that moved independently of any source. Quinn had discovered, through the patterns of disappearances, that the archive was the central node of the Watcher's network. He approached the building at dusk. The fog hung low over the streets, curling around the edges of the structure. Every instinct screamed caution. Even from the street, he could sense the archive observing him, aware of his presence before he even stepped inside. Entering the central node, the front doors were heavy, corroded iron, creaking ominously as he pushed them open. Inside, the smell of damp paper and mold filled his nostrils. Dust motes floated in the beam of his flashlight, swirling like miniature galaxies. The building's structure was impossible. Hallways twisted subtly, staircases seemed longer than memory allowed, rooms shifted as he moved through them. Immediately, the fog thickened inside. The Watcher's presence was palpable, curling around walls, floorboards, and the ceiling. Eyes blinked from every surface: windows, cracks in plaster, reflections in broken glass. And in the center of the room, partially transparent, were the preserved figures he had seen before: Janet, Michael, Clara, and dozens of others. Their eyes followed him, vacant yet aware, as though they had been waiting for him. A whisper entered his mind, layered and urgent. All observation converges here. Awareness is catalogued. You are next. Quinn's pulse spiked. He had prepared for this moment, mentally mapping each previous node, recalling patterns, shadows, whispers. Observation had preserved him so far, but this was the culmination. Every lesson, every encounter, every survival tactic would be tested now. The Watcher's convergence. As he advanced toward the center of the archive, the fog coalesced into shapes, elongated, faceless, limbs bending impossibly, moving in synchronized patterns. Every form he had encountered in past nodes emerged, multiplied, and converged into this central chamber. It was overwhelming. Quinn realized the truth. The Watcher's network was not static. It was dynamic, evolving, integrating. Every node, Ravenwood Lane, River Grey, the bridges, Black Hollow Path, the Whispering Trees, and Waverly Street, fed data into the archive. Every disappearance, every observation, every fear, every hesitation, was catalogued here. He felt the tug in his mind, stronger than ever. The Watchers were probing his thoughts, testing his reactions, measuring awareness, integrating consciousness. Every memory, every instinct, every survival tactic was being recorded and analyzed. Observe. Survive. Be preserved, the layered voices whispered. The ultimate test. In the center of the room, the floor shifted slightly, revealing a deep pit filled with mist. Shapes floated within, former witnesses, partially integrated into the Watcher's system, aware but immobilized. Janet stepped forward, her hollow gaze meeting Quinn's. She raised a hand in warning. Do not resist. Integration is inevitable. Only observation may preserve a fragment of self. Quinn nodded. He understood. Physical action was meaningless. Resistance had never worked. Survival depended entirely on observation, restraint, and mental focus. He stepped closer to the pit, flashlight scanning every angle. Shadows flickered in peripheral vision, fog pulsed, shapes moved just beyond clarity. Each step required deliberate awareness, each breath measured, each thought guarded. The Watchers were testing him as never before, their network converged, their influence absolute. A whisper echoed. All who witness converge here. Consciousness preserved. Awareness eternal. Integrating knowledge. Quinn began to see patterns, the architecture of the Watcher's system. Every node fed data into the central archive. Observation created integration. Awareness was the vector of preservation. The buildings, bridges, rivers, paths, forests, and homes were all conduits. Physical abduction was unnecessary. The system's intelligence was cognitive, psychological, eternal. He noted subtle variations in the fog, the movement of shadows, the layering of voices. Each element represented a past encounter, a catalogued consciousness. The archive was the culmination, a living repository of awareness, a nexus of observation, and the central node of the Watcher's network. He realized something chilling. He could never truly escape. Every previous node, every survival, every observation, had already bound him partially to the system. The archive only completed the integration. The Watcher's true form. Shapes coalesced in the fog, becoming more distinct, more synchronized, more overwhelming. The Watcher's forms were impossibly tall, faceless, elongated, limbs bending unnaturally. Eyes appeared not only on their bodies but in the fog, on the walls, in reflections. Awareness emanated from them, a palpable pressure on consciousness itself. They did not speak, but the whispering inside Quinn's mind carried the weight of thousands of integrated witnesses. You are being recorded. You are being preserved. Observation is eternal. Quinn understood the ultimate horror. The Watchers did not consume. They catalogued, preserved, integrated. Resistance or fear only accelerated assimilation. Observation itself bound consciousness to the network. And now, in the central node, the convergence was absolute. The final observation. Quinn stood at the edge of the pit. The fog swirled, forming ghostly images of the vanished, Janet, Michael, Clara, and countless others. Each figure flickered in and out of view, aware yet immobilized, part of the Watcher's eternal record. A final whisper. Observe. Be preserved. You are part of the system now. He raised his flashlight, scanning the room, the fog, the shadows, the walls. Every detail mattered. Observation became both survival and participation. Every movement, every thought, every focus of attention was catalogued. He realized that the Watcher's ultimate goal was not destruction, it was preservation. Consciousness was the prize. Awareness was the currency. Quinn took deliberate steps along the pit's edge, maintaining awareness, noting shapes, tracking movements, and observing the layers of the network converging around him. He understood the rules. Aggression or panic led to full integration. Careful observation might preserve a fragment of self. The fog pulsed, shadows shifted, eyes blinked in unison. The Watcher's influence pressed on him, probing, testing, recording. And yet, for the first time, Quinn felt a thread of control. By fully understanding the system, by observing consciously and deliberately, he could retain fragments of identity even within the Watcher's convergence. A fragment preserved. Hours, or perhaps moments, passed. Time seemed irrelevant within the archive. Quinn moved deliberately, maintaining focus, observing, recording. He felt partial integration, awareness of the Watcher's network imprinting on his mind, but unlike previous encounters, he retained deliberate self-perception. The pit glimmered with shapes, whispers layered inside his consciousness. Janet, Michael, Clara, and others observed him silently, their presence both warning and guide. He realized he was now both participant and observer, catalogued yet conscious, preserved within the Watcher's system, yet retaining fragments of self. A whisper, faint but distinct, entered his mind. Observation is eternal. Awareness preserved. You are part of the record. Quinn exhaled. Survival here was not escape. It was integration on his terms. Awareness, observation, and deliberate focus allowed him to retain self within the network. He was preserved, catalogued, yet conscious. Emergence. Finally, he retraced his steps to the entrance of the archive. The fog thinned slightly, shadows receded, yet eyes remained blinking in reflections and cracks. The Watcher's convergence persisted, eternal and patient, observing, recording. Quinn stepped into the night air outside the building. He was physically free, yet mentally intertwined with the system. Every previous node, every encounter, had prepared him. Awareness, deliberate observation, and mental focus allowed him to retain identity despite partial integration. He had survived the final observation, but he knew he was forever changed. The Watcher's network was complete, nodes converged, consciousness preserved. Streets, rivers, bridges, paths, forests, homes, all were part of the system. And now, he was a participant, catalogued yet conscious, aware yet preserved within their eternal observation. He glanced back at the archive. The fog curled, shadows flickered, and eyes blinked silently. The Watchers were patient, eternal, observing, and their system had reached completion. Quinn understood his fate. Survival was not escape. Observation itself bound him, integration inevitable. But through awareness, he had preserved fragments of self, a record of humanity within the Watcher's eternal network. The city slept, oblivious to the network that sprawled unseen beneath its streets, rivers, bridges, paths, forests, and homes. And the Watchers remained, patient, eternal, cataloguing, observing, preserving. Detective Harris Quinn exhaled. The final observation was complete.